Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm here. I didn't forget. I was talking with Dr. Hasan Johnson backstage. Cynical Optimist, you were the first one in, as per usual. Thank you for being here. Guys, I'm going to make sure this is broadcasting the way that it's supposed to. And then we will jump right in. And we're going to talk about the latest in Black masculinism. And there's a lot going on. So we're gonna cover a lot of ground for the time that I have Dr. Hasan Johnson tonight. So let me just make sure everybody, please smash that like button. That helps with the engagement. And no matter how long you stay, please smash that like button. And if you're not subbed, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'm going to play the intro and I'll see you on the other side. I'm going to make two quick announcements and I'm going to bring Dr. Hasan Johnson up. Because of where I come from, see, in this world, we're all living in different worlds, and not everybody is privy to the same information.
Look, it took me a long time to accept that Black women have been pondering politics that work in their interests for generations. Black men have never been acculturated to doing that, in my humble opinion. I think many of us have been working with that Black communal idea that goes back to the 60s and 70s. We weren't thinking of politics specifically in our interests as Black men. We were thinking about Black community. So as we started to reflect upon how, even in the last few elections, these women are functioning in a manner that is about them, not about the community, we're caught between either we try and convince them to operate communally, or we actually start to think about ourselves, or some combination of both. But this is where the 17-point Black male political agenda comes in, because even if you've watched presidential candidates who only show up every 4 years and maybe have one conversation with Black men in some kind of symbolic, barbershop, and ask them questions about what they want politically, most of those brothers had generic answers that were really about Black community. They were addressing racism, not specific to Black men. Very few of these guys ever sat down and said, well, looking at the data, this is what Black men are going through. They talked about Blackness. They talked about community.
Because of where I come from, see, in this world, we're all living in different worlds, and not everybody is privy to the same information. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Tonight, I have Dr. Hasan Johnson here to talk with me and talk with us. I was looking through my records and I realized that Dr. Johnson was here in April. I think it was April, May, or June, that transition from spring to summertime. Spring to summertime. It's been a long year, and he's always gracious enough to come back. And there's been a lot that's happened since he was here in that spring to summer transition. So I've been blessed. I've had Dr. Neal here, Dr. Ronald Neal, to talk about his book, Beyond Death in Jail. Jeff St. James came over. Dr. L came over, and I'm already talking about. I'm in talks for guests for 2026. I just purchased a copy of The Man Not. So once I power through that, I'll be reaching out to Dr. Tommy J. Curry. I believe it's J. Dr. Tommy Curry. I'll be reaching out to him. And I want to keep this book thing going. Since I am a self-published author, speaking of which, two quick announcements. So you'll see more interviews in 2026. And you will see me. I just got something interesting in the mail today. This T-shirt here. You'll see more merchandise. I'm not making merchandise, but my brother is. Those of you who know who visit my science channel on Saturday mornings, my brother has come on with me, and he's been dabbling in AI art. So you'll see me rocking his merchandise in 2026. This is Elijah McCoy. This is a T-shirt dedicated to Elijah McCoy, the inventor of the self-lubricating engine. So I just wanted to show this. So you'll see stuff like this throughout the year, but especially leading up to Black History Month and during Black History Month. So look out for that. Shout out to my brother, Amal Dunbar. And I'm a self-published author myself. I will make this announcement at the end of the stream, but please consider getting a copy of my book, The Engineers of Western New York Basketball Story, Part 1, Innocent Basketball Dreams. This isn't just a story about learning basketball, but it's this kind of definitely folds into a little bit of the topic areas that Dr. Hasan Johnson talks about in terms of being a Black boy growing up without male supervision, without significant male supervision. And when you grow up that way, there are a lot of things that you have to learn by yourself. And I think that's the story for a lot of us. The basis of this story is just a great game of basketball, but this is about many more things than the great game of basketball. I had a clip from an interview I did this weekend, but maybe I'll cue it up during the stream so I can show you all afterwards. But consider purchasing a copy of this. For my YouTube subs, the hardcover, I'm selling signed hardcover copies for $27 and the paperback for $22. You can use one of those methods there in the ticker. Just make sure you send me your mailing address as well. And thank you to everyone who has purchased copies thus far. I'm thinking about Corrine and Money Motion and Royston Gibbs and I can't think of the other people, but thank you for those who supported. Please consider getting a copy for yourself this holiday season for yourself or for a young person who likes to read. All right. With that out of the way, and I have an online store. I'll show you that at the end of our discussion. But with that out of the way, let me welcome back Dr. Hasan Johnson. We're going to talk about his Black Masculinist dictionary. That's just the name that I've loosely called it, but also current events and what's been happening. And men, to the brothers out there, if you be careful, especially if you have a position of power, you may get accused of something. Maybe you've done something, maybe you haven't, but be mindful of what you do at the job, professionally, with subordinates, with members of the opposite gender. And I think, as me and Dr. Johnson talk about, accusations can get thrown your way, and things come to the surface. My Michigan football team, our coach just got fired because he was doing something, but it was with a subordinate. So you just have to be smart, especially when you're melanated like us and you're a male. You have to be smart about how you move, because if you have a lot to lose, someone will be looking to snatch it from you. All right, everybody, let me welcome back up Dr. Hasan Johnson. Dr. T, welcome.
Hey, man, appreciate the invite. How you doing?
No problem. I appreciate your willingness to come. With this YouTubing thing, it makes a big deal when a larger creator will come talk to a smaller creator on their platform, and I appreciate your willingness to do this.
Oh man, it's all good. Can't turn down an invitation from Dr. Goodbar, So we gotta hook up. So
all right. Salute the Passport OG, Ghetto User, Money Motion, everybody, AB Media.
Salute
you all, Mr. Blue Collar, Stefan, 1830. All right, let's get this party started. So, Dr. T, thank you for coming back and updating me and others on the latest in Black masculinism. And I'll give you this first. Thank you for doing what you do, because you are enlightening all of us and changing lives. What are you up to these days? And number one, and how's your son's college experience going?
He's good, man. He's in his junior year. He's almost done with the first semester and that. So he's got about a year and a half left. He's literally the big man on campus at this point. So he's getting used to that, and he's finally, because he's in marine biology. So he's finally taking the courses that interest him. You know how it is in the sciences; they weed you out the first couple of years doing a bunch of stuff you don't like. But then you finally get to the stuff you really like, and he's just getting there. So I get messages from him about experiments that they're doing, and animals that he's getting them interact with. So he's loving it, and this is what I've been waiting for. So he's good. He's good. As far as myself, as I was telling you before we got on, I mostly teach from home. So I had one class on campus this semester, and that the last day of class for that was yesterday. So, so next week is finals. So we're kind of coming at the end of the semester, which, I'm ready for. Other than that, I just got an invitation to do another book, with a major press. They sought me out again, which is good news. So, I think I'm narrowing in on some subject matter that I'd be interested in writing about. So that's going pretty well. And other than that, man, I'm just, paying attention online and just checking to see what my brothers are up to, and where we're taking these discussions next. So that's kind of what I'm just, paying attention to at this point.
Okay. Passport OG says, marine biology sounds really cool. Yeah, I'm jealous. That means your son gets to go. He probably gets to go out on boats and out on the ocean. And
he hasn't gotten there yet. But when he can give you an hour lecture on starfish, he's loving what he's doing. So,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
he's in his zone. So,
and certainly from experience, yeah, he obviously has the aptitude. He's survived chemistry. He's survived physics. Okay, all those classes, they weed students out. They go in, because I went to an HBCU, and they go in. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a dentist.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as they hit those classes, they start having second thoughts.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And of course, after the new policy changes as far as loans and whatnot, I'm real curious how Black folk who are interested in going into medicine are dealing with that. So, so you have those kind of barriers you just described with the subject matter, but now you have loan issues, you have other things that are kind of, barriers as well. So I'm real curious how people are navigating it. But as far as my son, he's it's looking good. He's got like a year and a half left, and then we'll look at grad school because he wants to be a professor. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, he wants to teach marine biology. So,
okay,
yeah.
What is he following in your footsteps?
Not subject matter wise, but I think the life of a professor he likes. I think he's seen me kind of doing that, and he's like, "All right, Dad is not doing 12 hours, someplace breaking his back, but he's doing something he's interested in. He's seen me at the computer sometimes up to 24 hours working on books. He seems to be drawn to the life of a scholar, so I can't be mad at him. But he's fine. He's forging his own path, and I respect it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's dive into it. So I ask you this all the time, but there are so many people who don't know. And as a lead up to this question, Black masculinism. So after my last set of interviews with Dr. Neil, Jeff, and Dr. L, one of my relatives, I'll shout him out, my Uncle Ice, looked at it and he said, we need to stop with all this gender stuff. We just need to stop with all this gender stuff and just come together, is basically what he was saying. For those wondering why we need something like Black masculinism, what would you say?
Well, let me ask you, is he married?
He is.
How long?
He's been married probably since I was in grad school, so 2001, 2002, something like that.
I've had a couple of elder statesman level professors try and come in my Facebook page and have debates with men about this gender stuff. And I had to tell some of them, I said, look, with all due respect, you've been out of the loop for a very long time. And this is something that in many respects, if you can't really grasp it theoretically, be single and you'll find out very quickly what this is about. I was married for 9 years. I was with my wife for 11. When this stuff was brewing, I had no clue until I was single again. And, I'm coming back into the single marketplace in my mid 30s. Last time I was in it was in my early 20s. And I thought it would be the same. It was vastly different just in that, rough decade. So imagine being a couple of decades removed. I mean, I have guys, older guys who want to tell these young guys what to do. And they've been married 30, 40 years. And I'm trying to tell them, you really do not understand how different things are. But I've also had some elder cats get divorced or lose their wives and be forced back into single life, and they hit it like a brick wall. It becomes very clear. It is, and so it's not something. If you can't understand it from just conversation, I just humbly suggest you just kind of respect the fact that cats are intelligent and they're not doing it for no reason. You really don't want to get out in these streets and find out why we have to do it. But the reality is, the kind of gender dynamics that, especially in the Black community, women have been, subject to, particularly from the 1980s forward, right? The kind of Oprah agenda, the kind of Black feminist agenda that's been made mainstream. That narrative is not something you can just dismiss because you don't like it. As a man, you run into a real life experience where more than a few women you run across have the same programming. You know what I mean? A 6-figure income, 6-pack, car, house. How much are you worth? What's your credit score? These are questions you'll get, on the first date if you get one. This kind of programming is so deeply ingrained and repetitive that, if you're not familiar with it and you're forced back into single life, it will blow your mind. And if you do not address this, if you do not dialogue with other men and come to an understanding of where it is, you'll be stamped underfoot. Because these women are happy to marry you and they are happy to divorce you, and you will not understand it unless you talk to brothers who've been there. You know what I mean? And so from the outside, if you're not in it, it just looks like a trend that people are into that just needs to die down. It's easy to say when you're not in it, but once you're in it, you find out it's very real. It's very real. And there are men who've gone into debt, gone into poverty because they refused to learn the rules of this new environment. So Black men learning about gender, and men in general having to be forced to deal with it, it's really out of a very practical survival mechanism, because the system we're in is not designed to operate on our behalf. It's not, this is not just something we casually walk into. Courts have no empathy for men, particularly family courts. Women often have no empathy for men. And, as far as they're concerned, you're supposed to pay for their existence after the first date. They want wife level treatment after the first date. They want you paying their rent. Now, if you're an older cat, most of the time, guys like that don't have a problem with doing those kind of things with their wives, but they're not really tied into the fact that these days you have women telling you, you have to pay my bills on the first date and beyond. And as much as I thought that was a new thing, I remember telling my mother about that 5 or 6 years ago. And then I remembered something she said when I was younger. She used to tell me in the early 1980s that if a man didn't start paying her bills within 2 weeks of meeting her, she was done with him. So this is not a new dynamic, but it has gotten more brazen. And, and I think guys who are removed from that experience just don't understand it. So unfortunately, the gender thing has to be dealt with. You can't deny it or step in, unless you just don't want to deal with women. Then I guess you don't really have to pay attention to it. But even then, if you're in a workplace and you're around women and you don't understand, especially post Me Too politics in the workplace, you will find yourself in trouble before you know it. It's a language you have to learn, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you to Chief Rocca for the $20 super sticker. That's much appreciated. One of the many notable things that me and Jeff St. James talked about, and everybody, if you haven't seen Dr. Hasan Johnson's talk with Jeff, you should go listen to it. But he said that in that brief amount of time after he got, however long he was married, I'll have to go back and listen to see how long it was, but he said things changed on a dime. Yeah. And it was rough when he got back out into the world as a single man.
Oh, yeah. And it was going to be rough anyway. I mean, when you're dating in your 20s versus dating in your 30s, that biological clock with women is a whole different thing. So even if we didn't have the issues we have now, it was still going to be different. But I argue it was compounded with a lot of the kind of socialization women have had. This kind of, women first, female superiority, narratives, these things just really augmented the stakes. So you're really kind of walking into a minefield that you're not prepared for without the, and many of us did. I mean, that was really what brought, the manosphere about. It was men coming together and as I refer to it, comparing notes. And this was really the first time we could. With the advent of free social media, this is the first time men could actually do that. Prior to that, men didn't really have a platform. Women did. Women were given, they were handed a platform with movies, films, talk show, TV, and from the 80s onward. Men didn't have one until you got your YouTubes and your Facebooks. And when men started comparing notes, you had a guy in California and Texas and New York and Florida, and they're talking about divorce, and they're talking about women's behavior on the dating market and dating women with multiple kids and the expectations of you from there, being forced into child support for kids that aren't yours. And that didn't even deal with paternity fraud. And it's not just paternity fraud, because men have dealt with that since time immemorial, but paternity fraud in the era of DNA. You know what I mean? So now we're going into this period where women can no longer sweep it under the rug and give you a shaming kind of statement to deflect from whether or not they've been unfaithful and had a child that wasn't yours. Now this is verifiable. So we're in this area where these things are opening up in ways that never have been open for men to explore. You know what I mean? If a woman said the kid was yours, you just either had to be, asshole enough to walk away, or you had to sit and take it. But now, I mean, I can drive by on my way to work. There's a spot, $29.99 DNA test. You walk in, provide the DNA, they give you results. That's unprecedented. And so now we have women being called out even retroactively. I mean, there are people who are going to hospitals for medical procedures and finding out their fathers and mothers were not their fathers and mothers. Grandma lied, and apparently the bloodline is different on one side from the other. These are things that we can never verify before, and all of this is opening up at the same time. So, it's a very different environment, man.
Yeah, some of the statistics I'm hearing about this paternity fraud, this thing is prevalent.
Oh my God, yes. Yes, this is why France won't even touch it, man. They know their society would collapse, man. If and when it really cracks open, and I don't think it fully has yet, but when it completely does, man, it's going to be a shit show. It really is. But for men, I think this is a good thing, because it forces us to deal with the realities of female nature in ways that we can't tap dance around. I mean, you can, in the past, you could lie to yourself about whether the child was yours, whether she was being honest, even if you kind of looked like the mailman, you could always kind of lie to yourself because there was no true verification. Now, and if you're smart enough to get it done before you emotionally invest in this child, you know what I mean? It's one thing to do a DNA test on a 15-year-old kid that you've been raising versus a DNA test on a kid your wife had last week. Very different things. And now they're able to do it in womb, right? So, if you can get verification before she even gives birth, what does that do for men? What kind of options open up? Well, ideally, we're in a better position to avoid being exploited. That's never happened before.
Yeah.
So, so I think it's a good time and a good era. But I may have missed your question. Just kind of dealing with.
I have one more basic question about Black masculinism for those who are unaware. But this part of it gets pretty fierce, especially the mentality that you've been in the child's life, you should stay there, do what's right, don't leave that child. So this topic gets pretty contentious.
Oh yeah. I developed, because early on when I first was talking about Black masculinism, I was talking about it with Tommy Curry, and we were both talking about it wasn't. There's no need for like a male feminism. We weren't trying to do that. But when I developed it, I thought about it along two lines. The first of which was as an analytical tool for research. And this is why on the 1st and 15th, I do film reviews on my Patreon. What we do is we apply the Black masculinist idea to reviewing media. We assess stereotypes about Black males, representations of Black males. So we apply that lens. You can do this with literature, you can do it with film, you can do it with any form of media, but it really is an analytical tool for making sense of how Black men are represented and whether or not those representations are problematic. So that's one. The other way I use the term is to kind of explain men's behavior. So if you just take, for example, Black male studies and the manosphere, these are two separate endeavors that are taking place amongst groups of Black men. They're now under the table. There is some interaction. There's some reinforcement both ways. But at the end of the day, these are two separate movements, if you will, that develop independently roughly at the same time in response to what Black men have been experiencing, both in the academy and in society and so on and so forth. So what I did with Black masculinism is I was trying to say, it's not that these groups call themselves Black masculinists. It's that if you want to understand men's behavior, especially when it's critical of feminism, critical of women's behavior, and advocating for men on terms that haven't really existed in the mainstream before, masculinism is a kind of generic way of kind of describing these movements, because these movements are popping up, and it's not limited to those two areas, but these movements are popping up amongst men in a lot of different contexts. And I was just trying to say there's a new category that is not being properly framed. And to the extent that it is being addressed in the mainstream, where you get your Scott Galloways, you get your Richard Reeves, or you get mainstream media talking about it only in terms of Fresh and Fit and what's the main cat with the beard, bald head?
Is it Andrew?
Andrew Tate. They're happy to dismiss it, right?
Yeah,
they're happy to dismiss it. They'll take the most extreme examples, and they don't even really listen to those guys. But even to the extent they do, they'll just take clips that are out of context and just sound real extreme, and they'll say, "Well, that's what those guys are doing." I'm like, no, you actually have a whole community of guys that have a wide set of beliefs and ideas that don't always agree. But there's so much going on in that conversation, and you just want to dismiss it as just Andrew Tate or I forget excuse me.
Coach Greg Adams?
No, actually, I was thinking of the professor, Jordan Peterson. Right. In the mainstream, all of these discussions amongst men are really dismissed. Between Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, you just, and much of the time they don't even really directly address the Black manosphere. They just kind of collapse it all and say, well, this is just all one thing. I'm like, nah, if you actually listen, and we've been around for a while. I remember Mumia when he was just starting Obsidian. I remember Angry Man when he was just starting BGS and, all these different guys who were starting these platforms. And if you were going to sit there and tell me they all believe the same thing, that just highlights to me that you don't listen to any of them. These guys have radically different perspectives on all kinds of things, and they always have. And that's actually a very good thing. But as far as the mainstream is concerned, everybody's just Andrew Tate. So, I just tried to say with Black masculinism, there's a community, there's a movement, there's a conversation going on amongst men, and it's taking place in different contexts. It's not all connected to each other, but it is a time when men are responding to how they're being treated in society. And if you're going to ignore it, do so at your own risk. But these men are creating changes in their communities that you're not part of that discussion. You're not going to understand what's coming. And they're really responding, especially in the Black community, to over 30 years of Black women's behavior. They just never had a platform to do so with. And it's in the last 10 to 15 years that they started to use what was available, free, cheap social media, to the point where you got wealthy dudes, sitting on panels with guys who are couch surfing, and they're having discussions about their experiences. And strangely enough, finding out that a lot of those experiences are far more similar than you would imagine. You know what I mean? I know guys that don't have a pot to piss in that are still being exploited, whether it's for sex, whether it's for sperm, whether it's for, whatever, sacrifice they can make, whatever. And then I've known guys who were in, the mid six figures, 500,000 a year, and they were dating and marrying women who made more than them, but they were still required to pay all her bills. You know what I mean? So when you have a guy making $500,000 a year being exploited, and a guy who's lucky to make 30 a year being exploited, there's a conversation that's now happening in the last decade between those guys that never happened before. 30 years ago, you wouldn't have that happen. It was virtually impossible unless they were both sitting at the barbershop. Now it's happening. And that's creating a whole different reality. So I use Black masculinism just as a marker to say these conversations are happening. These movements are happening, and they're not an accident. So That's how I use the concept.
Okay, so everybody, that was a discussion on what Black masculinism is, which was one of my questions, but you answered that, so thank you. It's using empirical data to basically visit and discuss how Black men experience the world and what's been happening with us. If you haven't, you should get a copy of Dr. T's first book, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death. He talks about the Black masculinist terms and turns, not terms, turns. And there's history about our people in here, and there's the political agenda is in here, and Dr. T talked about, just for completeness, you talked about how Black men are perceived. Dr. Neal goes into that quite a bit in his book, talking about the demonic imaginary. So these are two books I highly recommend to everybody. I want to thank Totally Awesome 8935 for the 1999 super chat. He says, I'm just paying for tuition. Thank you guys. And Passport OG, thank you for the 1600 Japanese yen. Domo. So everybody, that's Japanese for thank you. That's the only Japanese word that I know. And then Maxi6579 says, love these two brothers. Thanks to both of you for the sacrifice. Okay, let's move on. This name came up in our previous conversation, and it's funny because I was listening to some old school Keith Washington at work today, and Keith Washington and Shantae Moore, and Friday night Tavares came up on my my YouTube feed. You young guys don't know who that is, but those are love songs. They made a lot of love songs, and so George Fraser. I've been following George Fraser's quest to salvage Black marriage here. And in one of his videos, he talked about we need to bring back more love songs. We need to bring back more Temptations. I'm sure you've probably seen that video of him with the two grandmas in the back. And
yeah, I would push against that a bit, but I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah. So a lot has happened since then. Since April, Jeff St. James went viral. Scott Galloway is now promoting his book. We have the Great Feminization article by Helen Andrews. But George Fraser, at least for me, he made news as well, because George Fraser came out and he poured some liquor out for Kevin Samuels. Yeah. And I was like, really? Yeah. George Fraser? It's like, yeah, Kevin, I really appreciate him. I miss him. And I really liked his work. To my knowledge, he hasn't said anything about that up to this point, but I think, and then Jeff on Instagram, Jeff posted a clip of George Fraser talking about how your rank and file, shout out to Obsidian, your rank and file Black woman today is more content to be a baby mama than a wife. So I'm saying this to say, it looks like he's become red pilled, and he's from the kind of the conscious Black wealth Black family sector. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, in terms of the conscious community, you got to remember those cats were dating, internationally in the 1980s. You know what I mean? Like I'm in Black studies. I'm in Africana studies. I remember in the 80s when these cats started coming back with wives from Tanzania, Ghana, and that shit, they framed it as Pan-Africanism, but the reality of it was, because I would sit down with them at conferences, I would have conversations with these cats, and I get a chance to ask them some real questions. And you get a couple of beers in them, and they get loose and start talking. They'll tell you they had two Black wives from the U.S. first. They've been to family court. They've had the kids taken away from them. These are some of your most, popular Black nationalist conscious scholars who've been drugged through the freaking mud. And the next thing you know, 1988, he comes back with a wife from Ghana. It wasn't an accident. The only problem I have with those guys is they're not willing to be honest and talk about how a lot of what the guys who were talking about in red pill spaces is something that they've been dealing with for decades. This is not new for any of us, let alone those guys. So
The conscious community likes to stand out like it's not connected, but when you get these men in a room and start talking, they have the same experiences that we talk about. And I'm a living testament to it. They do. I've heard it, I've talked to them, and I've experienced it. We all have. It's just, they don't want to make those kind of public linkages. But then at the same time, a lot of those guys will applaud me under the table, send me emails and messages thanking me for doing the work. So the most they'll do is they'll not attack you publicly, but they don't want to necessarily come out and confront Black women on their behavior. But, when you find out them guys are married to a woman from South Africa, don't get it twisted. None of that is coincidental, and it ain't accidental. And most of them had American Black wives before they married an African wife or a Caribbean wife. It's not a freaking accident. As far as Frazier, I have none but respect for him. I appreciated what he said about Kevin, and all that really told me was that he bothered to listen to Kevin rather than just take the stereotypes about what Kevin was about, particularly from aggrieved Black women. The same women that's applauded his death. These are the same women that on social media are happy to take his talking points while still denying him and denouncing him to this day. But the reality of it was Kevin was trying to reinstitute marriage. He was trying to get the Black community back together again. And it's not a position I agreed with him on, but I respected the fact that he was willing to put it all out there to make it happen. And he did a hell of a job, as far as I'm concerned, putting the argument out there to the point where it was mostly Black women knocking on his door to have conversations with him, despite all of the conversation about how he abused Black women on his shows. They sought him out and asked for advice, and much of the time would bring him disrespect. You know what I mean? Kevin was always quick to say, I'm just going to give you back what you give me. So when they have these sound bites where he's, yelling at somebody or whatever, 9 times out of 10, they were yelling at him and he responded. And that's the part that gets clipped. But at the end of the day, he was actually trying to bring people together. And I respect that. Lastly, you brought up Frazier and, the love songs, the R&B music. The one thing I'll say, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I think it got a little out of hand. And what some of us young men were coming into listening to a lot of that music, it went from love songs to female worship. And we were kind of taught to pedestalize her, to, really ignore our own experiences with her and just kind of idealize how women behave. And women, of course, enjoyed this because they were able to take advantage of it. I mean, if I remember correctly, the older women sitting behind Frazier as he was talking about this, they were loving it. They were smiling, they were grooving to it, but that's exactly the reaction they had to the music. And they would do some of the most horrible stuff to men in actual relationships and have no kind of care about it. And I think, many of us that grew up in those eras, as much as I still love the music because I grew up listening to it, we had to push that away to an extent and find ourselves, on terms that weren't given to us by women or by popular R&B. Like, we really had to redefine the way we interact with women, because if we follow that framework, that was the framework that got you taken advantage of. You know what I mean? You're paying her way through college. You're taking over her debt. You're raising her kids, and she's sleeping with the next man, leaves you, takes half of what you got in a divorce, gets with somebody else. And you start the cycle all over again with the next woman you done fallen in love with and pedestalized. It's a cycle that many of us had to get off of. So as much as I understand what Frazier is talking about in terms of wanting to reinstill the love in that respect, you got to be practical and really take stock, in regard to what men have been experiencing. And that creates a different kind of music. It creates a different kind of social culture. But that's as close as you're going to really get, because men have gone through too much to, bury it under the ground and pretend like it didn't happen. They've gone through way too much.
Yeah. Well, my I think my ending question was, if you were to talk to Frazier, what would you say? And I think you just said it right there. And I think, just from the outside looking in, I think he's gradually seen how complex this is and how far gone it is.
Yeah. I don't know his marital situation. He strikes me as someone that's been married for a very long time, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But if he is, it sounds like he's actually had some conversations with people who aren't, and it sounds like he might have actually been listening. And I respect that.
Yeah. I want to thank Dr. L. Salute to you, Dr. L. He says, keep up the good work. Thank you for the $5 super chat.
What's up, Dr. L?
there's another comment here that I'm gonna that's specifically to you from Ray Alexander. Salute to Ghetto User. He says, growing up in that era, that is exactly what happened. Very few love songs by Black women to Black men. Worship her is what they were doing. Thank you, Ghetto User. But there were a few. For a while, I was playing my my Anita Baker on Spotify, and Anita made some tracks expressing her love for the man she was singing to in the song. So there were some, there were some. Inspirational Truth says, passport, Pan-Africanism, you're right, and the universities, the world, and at universities, the world comes to you. Okay, I think that's a go overseas. That's why SBM comment. Ray Alexander says, at Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, when you get a chance, could you update us on your son's experiences as a fourth-year STEM major at the university level on your channel sometime soon?
Okay. Well, I said a few words about it at the beginning of this show, but no, yeah. I'm happy to. I almost brought him up right around Thanksgiving, but he was in there cooking, so I didn't bring him in. But I might do that.
Now, Dr. T, if you feel comfortable talking about this, we can. If not, we can jump to the next one. But I did ask Jeff this question when he was here. I know your wife passed some years ago, but I think it's important to talk about for the men who married the qualities of their wives. There's a clip of Denzel with TD Jakes, and so now there's interest in what are good wifely qualities. Do you want to say a few words about what your wife was like?
Okay. Well, let me see. My wife died in 2009, but she was 3 years younger than me. How could I put this? So she was one of the things that drew me to her. She was very sweet. You ever run across people that just kind of strike you as having a kind of an innocent nature?
Mm-hmm.
There's just I know for some people it's like it's inconceivable, but there are people that kind of just have an innocent nature about them, and I tend to be drawn to those kind of people. She was very much like that, and that's not to say that those people don't have bones in their closet, and it's not to say they're perfect or any of that. But I was drawn to women that were a little more pure, a little more innocent, and she was kind of like that. A lot of that was because she was sheltered, and I learned about this years later. And I really came to understand my own reasons for being drawn to her much later than even that. But she was somebody that had sickle cell. Mm-hmm. And she was raised pretty much in hospitals. Like, you see those kids with leukemia that live in the hospitals? Mm-hmm. She was one of those. And I didn't know all of that when I met her. I knew a little bit about sickle cell. I knew some people in school that have it, but I really didn't understand it. So a lot of her purity and a lot of her innocence was because she was sheltered, because she was so ill. And by the time I got to know her, she would only get sick like maybe once or twice a year. So it was a little more contained than when she was younger. And so she kind of had that innocent spirit about her. And it just made me, want to protect her and that whole kind of thing. So she was very sweet. And we didn't have our first argument for about 2 to 3 years. I remember the first argument we had, we fell out laughing, and, because we had never argued before, and I had never met somebody that we didn't argue, but that was kind of one of those things. And so I enjoyed that because every relationship I had was pretty typical as far as what we all experienced. And this is the first person that she couldn't say an ill word about you if you paid her to. Like, she really just did not have that in her. And I really appreciated that. She was very gracious. And I've talked about this on my show. When she was in the hospital, she'd be in the hospital for about 2 weeks a year. And if you went to visit her, in as much pain as she was in, she'd be far more concerned about your needs. She'd be far more concerned about what would make you feel comfortable. And I was blown away by that. It took me years to understand after that, though, that a lot of that was because she lost so many friends. And even, when she would have a boyfriend, the moment they saw her sick, they would take off for the hills and she'd never see him again. So she got to, the point where she was very, very gracious about people because she was so used to losing them when they saw how sick she was. And so I kind of responded to that differently. But in hindsight, what I recognize is I was looking for I wasn't necessarily looking for passport bros because I wasn't thinking internationally, even though I had friends that had started dating internationally. But I was doing something very similar at that time on a subconscious level. I was looking for Black women that were socialized differently. Didn't know I was doing it. It was kind of an unconscious thing. And when I ran across her, I was drawn to her. I ran with it. But in hindsight, I realized years later, a lot of it was because I was trying to break from the sister girl thing. I was trying to find Black women that were socialized differently. And I ran across a woman that was raised in a hospital. And I didn't know, I really didn't understand those things about even my own motivations at that time. And I don't necessarily regret any of that because she was a beautiful person. Nothing was perfect. The relationship wasn't perfect. The marriage wasn't perfect. But we were two young kids who were looking for something different. We kind of found it in each other. We had a beautiful son. We lost 3. To the point where she actually had to deliver my daughter who was stillborn. So I'm holding my daughter, so that was rough. And the last pregnancy is what actually ended up taking her out. So, these are, there's just definitely a fraught kind of history. But as far as her qualities, she was fairly feminine, but she still had some of the popular feminist ideas in there, as far as not wanting to be a housewife and that kind of thing. And those things would still pop up in conversation because that was what, everybody was talking about. All her friends, you saw it on TV, you saw it in movies. So you'd be hard pressed to find Western women that didn't have some degree of that feminism. But, with her, it would only go so far. And it wasn't just because she was, concerned about your feelings and your well-beings as her man. It was also because on a practical level, and again, I learned this the hard way, she needed help. She needed someone that could take care of her. So the feminism only went so far. Now, these are not things that I went into the marriage conscious of. These are things that I learned as we were going. We were learning about ourselves. We were learning about each other. We were young. I mean, I'm trying to remember what, I got married in 2000. So you figure 25. Yeah. So I was about 25. I'm 51 now. So I was about 25 going on 26. She was 3 years younger. We were just young. And that was kind of how that went. So, beautiful person, very sweet. Never saw her say a bad word about anybody. She just kind of just didn't have that in her. And I had never known somebody that didn't have that in them. You know what I mean? Like the angriest she would get at you. You ever do this? And I know you've experienced it. You with a woman, y'all get into a knockdown, drag out argument, and stuff comes out of her mouth that you're like, this is my girl and this is coming out of her. And you are everything under the sun because she's pissed off. She didn't have that in her. Even when she was at her angriest, she'd be hard pressed, an insult from her was like, you're mean. And you just be like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? She didn't have that. And I was drawn to that. I was looking for an experience with the feminine. And I say this a lot about passport bros, that's not rooted in misandry and contempt. And she didn't have that contempt that so many of the Black women that I grew up with in my own family and in other families, were raised with. She didn't have it. Even though her father wasn't there, she was adopted by her grandmother. Her mother abandoned her. She didn't have the kind of contempt that I was used to seeing from women. But the feminism was still there to a degree, and we still had, the same kind of issues that, modern couples had in the early 2000s. So that wasn't, I'm not saying it was completely different, but those were the kind of qualities she had, very sweet. And my son, there's a service called Legacy Box. Mm-hmm. And you can send in all these old tapes and stuff and they'll digitize them for you. And I just sent in a bunch of stuff about a month ago and got them back. And I apparently, I recorded, her playing with our dogs at the time. We had some pit bulls and
she was just in the house playing with them and talking to them. And it was about a half hour long, right, of her just talking to me, talking to the dogs. And I realized that my son had never seen her talk before. I actually found the tape where he gave birth to her. And so I shared that with my son. It took him a few weeks before he watched it, but he shared with me. He said, I actually never saw her just sitting there talking. He was 4 when she passed. So that was not something, he didn't get to know her as a mother. And so when he got to see how she carried herself, how she talked, it blew him away because he never got a chance to see that. And so anyway, yeah. So I don't know if I went too far off topic, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And others in the chat appreciate you sharing that transparent and forthright reflection on who she was and what you were looking for at that time. It seems as though you had an awareness of the hostility. I guess that's the right word, towards Black men. You had some sort of conceptualization of it. I'm thinking back for myself, my first encounter. I think I had heard, I started on TV seeing Ricky Lake and Oprah, and when I was too young to understand what was going on. And I think my first encounter with why do I have to cook? Why can't a man cook? That was my first girlfriend out of high school. And then my first time hearing I don't need a man, that was from the girlfriend after that. So we were in our late teens, and I recall on some level hearing both of those comments. Why can't my husband take my last name? Just that sounded odd to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what I was hearing, but I know that all of it sounded a little bit off. But you had at that point at 25, you had some sort of conceptualization of what that was.
Well, there's 2 things that you just brought to mind that I don't want to forget. The first, I'm already starting to forget. I had an idea of what I was avoiding, but I couldn't really articulate it. It was a more of a gut feeling, right? And but I was noticing that my boys that I had gone to school with, they were marrying women from other countries. And it wasn't until after she passed, I looked around at my friend network and I noticed that most of them had dated interculturally or interracially. They were dealing with women from other countries, or, first and second generation from other countries here in the US, but they were still raised with a traditional value system. I didn't realize that this was happening. So one day, I'm looking around and I'm like, y'all all married women from Haiti and from Brazil and from Africa. And I'm like, did y'all have a meeting you didn't invite me to? Because I was married. So I guess, but they all kind of laughed at me and they were like, it was never formal. You know what I mean? It was just, I think we were all just operating on a gut reaction. And so you're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s. These guys were going international then, and they were coming back with wives. So now they've been married 25 years to women from other countries, from other cultures. And they were, and all these guys were handsome. They were accomplished. None of my boys, all of us, had graduate degrees and so on and so forth. So these guys, I've known them really since high school for some of them, since first year of college for others. None of them had less than 25, 30 women that they dated, some up to the 70s and 80s. We had all dated. So none of us were, what do they call, incels that couldn't get women. And it was none of that. It was guys who had plenty of options, but just kept running into the same problematic programming in women over and over and over. And they just reached a point where they were done. And the next thing I knew, they came back with wives from other places. So my wife, and what I'm trying to say is I had the same mentality they did. I just didn't go internationally to find it. I just went in a direction I probably wouldn't recommend, but I didn't do it on purpose, in terms of going to find someone raised in a hospital. But all I knew was that she didn't have the same programming. And that's kind of all they knew, because they didn't really plan it out. They didn't have the discussions that passport bros are having now. They didn't even discuss it amongst themselves. Each individual man just kind of was operating off his gut instinct and came back with a woman that wasn't programmed that way. So, those kind of things were just a little different. And, it just kind of happened that way. And the more I started coming into this space,
I ended up explaining to them why they were doing what they were doing 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. You know what I mean? Because none of us could articulate it then, or until very recently. And as I started delving into these spaces, I'd go back to them and say, you do know this is why you did X, Y, and Z. And we'd have these rich conversations where they were like, yeah, I didn't realize that's why I was doing it. But it's the same motivations men have now. They want an experience with the feminine that isn't rooted in contempt. I mean every word of that. And really, as long as they're attracted to those women, they're men, black men in particular, are caring less and less about where those women are coming from. As long as there's an attraction and those women are able to come with a socialization that's not hostile to manhood, men are willing to do it. Oh, and they're able to do it. Women all over the world are interested in Western men and black men, and so they have options that black women are hesitant to acknowledge. But it is what it is.
Okay. What's fascinating is that a lot of this, if looking at some of these older videos, a lot of these things go back before us. I'm thinking about the video where the men are sitting on one side and the women are sitting on the other side, and you got the lady with the afro and the glasses, and she's going on. I think you probably know which video I'm talking about. Where you need to take it from us, and you need to, if we get control, we're gonna take control. And so I'm saying that to say that it seems a lot of these behaviors, they go back a while.
Yeah, I think so. Can I, you know what? I just have something really random. Do you mind if I share it for just a quick second?
Go for it.
I apologize. It just hit me, and I was going to say it earlier and I forgot. With all due respect to my wife, she was kind of an ugly duckling. And I don't mean that in the sense that she was ugly. She was a dark-skinned black woman who was raised in Petaluma. I don't know if anybody's been to Petaluma, California. It's north of San Francisco. All white, like working class town. She was one of maybe two black families there. So dark-skinned black girl, school full of white kids. She was the odd person out. She was the strange kind of ugly duckling. And when I met her in college, she was, for lack of a better way to put it, blossoming. But she was oblivious to it. And so I started like getting her little clothes, little outfits. And she'd get dressed and she would go out and people would be looking at her. Guys would be, damn near crashing cars staring at her, completely oblivious. She didn't understand. When guys would stare at her, she would think she didn't know. She'd be like, why is he staring at me? And I'd be laughing. I'd be like, don't worry about it, baby. Just come on. And she'd be like, what did I do? And I was like, don't worry about it. But matter of fact, I think one of the guys who used to make fun of her when she was younger saw her at a bus stop when she was visiting home once. And this was after she'd been with me for a couple of years. So she's dressed, she's doing her thing, and he's like mouth on the ground, hitting on her, and she's laughing, but it takes her a minute to realize he doesn't remember her from school. She thinks he's joking with her, but it takes her a minute. She's like, hey, it's me, Desiree. And like, it hits him. But for her, it was a process. So she was kind of an ugly duckling, and when she blossomed, she didn't really understand why men were treating her differently. And I just thought it was hilarious because, she just didn't get it. People were fawning all over her, and I'm laughing, and she's just looking at them like, what's wrong with him? I'd be like, nothing, baby. Come on. You just keep looking. So anyway, sidetrack. But where were you? You were asking me something now.
I was just reflecting on a lot of what we experienced, and even what we're seeing today. Some of the stuff has been going on for the last,
you mean
last century.
Yeah.
Just the inability or the loss of the men and women in our community to work together, and the grappling for power, the battling for power. You have to wrestle control from us. That kind of thing.
I think white women, especially after the civil rights movement, offered black women an option. They offered them the opportunity to gain in society at the expense of their men if they just hitched their wagons to white women politically. And white women were able to deliver to an extent. Black women could now transition out of domestic jobs, and they could get white collar jobs, low level,
they got paid less than white women, but now they were, able to get different types of jobs, and more they were able to be more readily employed than the average black man. So if they were poor, they could get welfare more readily than we could. If they were middle class, they could go to college and get white collar jobs more readily than we could. It's not to say that black men were doing nothing. I mean, to this day, for working black men, we still get paid more than they do. But, when you talk about employment in the first place, when you talk about the frequency of employment, I mean, I grew up in an era in the early 90s coming into my adulthood where girls were getting jobs that paid $10-15 an hour when, a lot of the guys I knew, we were lucky to get $5, you know what I mean? And they could quit jobs and go get another one on a whim, where for us, it was rough. You know what I mean? Anytime I lost a job, it took me at least 6 months to get another. My first year of college, I couldn't find any employment at all. I was living off of bags of potatoes and boxes of cereal, you know what I mean? But I watched this time period where for them, I think they were being cultivated with this idea that, society could operate on their behalf. And I think they kind of took that to the head in many ways. Black men, they had luxuries in that respect that black men didn't have. And I think when you talk about, when you approach it from that angle, you can kind of see how they were enticed, they were seduced, and bought into it wholesale. And to the point where black men and women had very different experiences, despite being in the same so-called community. And so, and now the other dynamic to that is most black women believed that we all had one black experience. So if black men were not able to perform and navigate society as easily and as well as they did, they could chalk it up to us being individually incapable, right? If you couldn't find jobs as easily, if you couldn't find jobs that paid as much, you know what I mean? There was something wrong with you. She didn't look at it as anything systemic unless it was something that impacted her. So trying to explain to black women that we had two different experiences was extremely difficult to do for the longest. And it still really is because they don't believe it. It doesn't really happen until they have sons. Really, the average black woman doesn't really come to believe it unless she had brothers or maybe a father that she saw. But usually it's when they have sons, and then they start to see the difference in how black men and women, especially if they had a daughter and then a son, you know what I mean? They see the difference in that treatment. That's when I get women that reach out to me and say, okay, I can hear you now. Can you help me explain? Can you explain to me this and that about what's going on with my son? But without that, I notice it's very difficult. But, in many respects, we had very different experiences, and trying to get them to understand that was difficult. And I think a lot of guys, have really just gotten tired of trying to do so,
Yeah. I want to salute BGS Ibmore from his command center. He says 160 watching from here. Thank you for your support, Master Teacher. And Jeff St. James has entered the chat, the Godson. Thank you for being here as well. Jeff. Yeah. Dr. Johnson, we're gonna move on, but you said something very, very powerful about the different lived experience thing. And when I mentioned me and my mother talked about this when I was home for Thanksgiving. When I mentioned her and my aunts and uncles and my relatives, sometimes I'm doing that for entertainment purposes, but I think it highlights this generational difference in how the world is perceived, how the community is perceived. And when we were watching, I think we were talking about the 18-point black male political agenda, and you talked about the different political leanings and the philosophical political split between black men and women, and how there's a pursuing of different agendas. I'll just make that nice. I remember my mother looked at me. She said, "I don't agree with that. I disagree with that." That's I interpret that, as a lack of understanding of what's really happening. How there's been as Dr. Neal says in his book, a bifurcation. Okay, there has been a bifurcation.
You know how you resolve that, right?
How's that?
Is one of the ways I use the black male political agenda, because I get guys that'll tell me, oh yeah, my mother, my woman, she doesn't believe we have any differences. She said that's ridiculous. And I'll tell them, take them through the black male political agenda and tell me how far you get before she picks an argument. I have yet to run across anyone that's made it past maybe the fifth sub point of the very first agenda item. Usually, especially by the time you get to DNA testing at birth, it's usually an argument that jumps off. And I'm like, that's how you can tell, because we never had a list that we produced. We really never did. But we watched Black women develop a political agenda while telling us that they weren't. They were gaslighting us. But we watched it in the 80s. We watched it in the 90s. They were slowly building this kind of political framework to the point where the Democratic Party started to address them. The Democratic Party started to address them directly in terms of marketing the left to the Black community. They didn't really pay much attention to us. They paid attention to Black women. And then, of course, by the time you get to a certain point, they started talking about Black women as the mothers of the movement. And this is something the Democratic Party begins to foreground in their approach to things. But really, when you get to the core of it, Black men watched Black women develop a political agenda that was distinct to themselves while having a foot in this Black community idea, so that, so it was conveniently useful for them when it was conveniently useful. And when they wanted to kind of gaslight us and then operate it from this Black framework, they could do the same. But the expectation was that Black men need to just continue to advocate for the community. And we followed suit with that until maybe 5 years ago, where BGS and I and a few of us kind of started talking about this Black male political agenda. And the more we put it together, the more we found how frustrated Black women were at the things we were talking about. And I'm saying, well, I guess you now understand how frustrated Black men have been listening to you. But our frustrations were muted because we really, they weren't forthright about it. It was really subtle, so we were just kind of like, what? All right, what is that? I mean, it's not just that more of them were running for office. It's not that. It was that they had a particular agenda that was very Black women first. And you started to hear that more and more from the 80s onward. We're going to do this program for Black women. We're going to set up these nonprofits for Black women. We're going to set up these policies, these bills for Black women. We're going to set up businesses for Black women. We want money for funding for Black women. Everything, you started to hear this rhetoric over and over again. Black women, Black women, Black, and it was just, it got to be very dogmatic. Even in my classrooms, I just noticed this the other day. So I have a class where there's a couple of classes, but I allow them to choose, what subject they want to write about for their final papers. Almost, I would say 96, 97% of the Black women that take my classes, when they get to choose the final subject they want to write about, what do you think they want to write about? Out of any subject you can imagine under the sun for Black folk, what do you think they want to write about?
Oh, geez, Dr. T, is it abortion rights? Is it
it's Black feminism.
Black feminism. Okay,
that's it. Now, I've been teaching for 27 years. This hasn't changed with every group. And matter of fact, it's not even just Black women. I've had Latinas in there, and they want to write about feminism. It's almost like a default programming. It's amazing to see how repetitive it is, but it is what it is. And so in similar fashion, just like what I talked about with politics, just like I talked about with nonprofit resources or grants or subject matter chosen in college, this kind of reference, this self-referencing set of politics is so repetitive and consistent that I think for many of us, it took us years to come to grips with the fact that they actually have their own set of politics. They just don't admit to it when you challenge them, but you see them advocating for it on a regular basis. So, I think it took a long time for Black men to say, well, because even to this day, when I ask Black men politically, do you think there's anything we need as Black men? Most of them will look at you and blink. And I've said this many a time, when we have when there's a new presidential election going on, doesn't even matter if it's the right or left. When they finally approach Black men and ask them, what you need, we talk about the Black community, or we just talk about the right and wrongs of society on a national level. But very rarely do you see Black men say, no, we need policies specific to Black men, and here are a list of the ones we think we need. Rarely will you find Black men willing to do that. Rarely. You can go to your top political analysts, if you will, even on YouTube, that deal with politics. Rarely do you see brothers break into a list of policies that Black men need. Very rarely. So this is a slow thing we're just now starting to get used to.
Well, that sounds similar to your observation that the young Black men in your class didn't have personal dating standards for themselves.
They still don't.
While the ladies had to have their lists.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Yeah, it usually takes until after 30. That's the earliest I'm seeing brothers starting to develop their own kind of approach. But yeah, most of the time, the women, and they inherit it from their mothers and their grandmothers. This is the list of standards you need to have. Nobody sits down with young Black men and says,
No.
This is the list of standards you should have
No.
before you date. Here, write these 10 things down and memorize them. You're not going to date anyone that weighs more than you. You're not going to date anyone. We don't have that. Black men will, as long as she's nice to us, and sometimes if she isn't, you'll see brothers who are willing to commit to women on, from all kinds of different situations. Women, very different in that regard.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to some of that when we go over some of the words, but it's generally be the best man you can be as caring as you could be as sensitive as you could be as much of service as you can be as chivalrous as you could be, but no lists of wants or criteria for us.
Right.
Okay.
And then of course the any amount of it that we have seen introduced. And this is one of the things that pissed women off about Kevin. When Kevin started really breaking down weight, it was interesting to see how frustrated women got and how quickly. Because it wasn't like every brother was talking about women's weight like that. But when Kevin started talking about it, brothers were kind of like, yeah, he makes a point. When he started talking about you weigh more than a linebacker and that whole kind of thing, women got very frustrated. But it's like, well, when y'all talk about height, you dismiss, whole populations of men because they're not 6'2". Yeah. And somehow you want us to believe that that's different than saying a man doesn't want to date a woman that's more than 200 pounds. You got the nerve to be upset because Kevin said that, but you'll fully dismiss men because they're not taller than 6'2". Really? You don't see this double standard at all, and women will look you dead in the face and say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I was going to say this earlier, but the anger and the vitriol surrounding Kevin, that was real. That's some ladies get very, very fired up over him. They will get angry to even to this day. Yeah. Even to this day, they get angry over the mention of his name. From personal experience. This is a quick aside here. Inspirational Truth says, small side note, are any of y'all doing TikTok Live Fest? I know a few of us are on TikTok. TikTok has been sending me notifications that I have the ability to go live. I just haven't had time to do it. Are you on TikTok, Dr. T?
Technically, but I have an account, but I haven't used it, and I rarely go. I just set it up because people were sending me TikToks and I wanted to see what they were sending me, but I don't really use it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't know about the lives.
Okay. Dr. T, did you I only saw one lady really react to it. Speaking of Kevin and Image and young Black men, the Gen Z and the Gen, I guess the Gen Alpha guys. Did you have any reaction to the whole quarter zip piece?
I thought it was revealing. As far as the contempt we talk about, I thought that was extremely revealing.
Yeah.
How much contempt there was over something as arbitrary as a quarter zip. You know what I mean? That to me was the main issue. I mean, but at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter what it is, whether you're sagging your pants, wearing a quarter zip, or a full 3-piece suit. The contempt seems to be consistent either way. So to me, it's not about the outfit; it's about the contempt. Because regardless of what Black men are doing, they're still getting it. You know what I mean? And that's to me one of the more interesting things about it. It would be one thing if it was just coming from faceless social media accounts, but you have Black women recording videos where you can see the extent to which they absolutely hate Black men, no matter what we're doing, whether it's positive or negative. I mean, it would be one thing if they were just talking about brothers that were shooting people in the street or something. Maybe that would be something. But they're talking to men that are trying to go to school, trying to get professional jobs so they can save up money and achieve goals. I'm like, you're actually this upset about brothers who are really? Okay, well, that shows us a lot more than you may be intending to show us. But that goes to exactly what many of the men are talking about. And what in Black male studies we've been talking about is, anti-Black misandry. The contempt is that deep.
Yeah. I'm gonna read this comment from BK Boy 88. He says, I realized I don't have standards as a Black man in my 30s.
Right.
It's a hard realization. I took therapy and couldn't even tell my therapist what my needs were.
There you
That's
go.
not unusual.
There you go. Yeah. A lot of us, if you go back 5 years, the only ones I saw doing that were over 40.
Yeah.
You know, before they can even list what those standards may be. And of course, they were shamed and attacked for having them, regardless of what they were.
Yeah. To my family's credit, to my mother's credit, when I was going through some of my struggles, one of the things she did say is you teach people how to treat you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you need something further than that. You need to learn about self-love. You need to learn that, you know, your personal peace. You need to learn that there are things you can ask for as well. So long story short, a lot of us as men, we don't get that early on.
No, not at all.
It usually comes after some years of struggle and battle.
Yeah. And then there's the other side of that, which BGS tried to warn me about during COVID. Once you do learn how to love yourself, once you do learn how to not be afraid of being alone, once you do learn how to manage your money and it's not all about spending it on whichever woman you run across, you actually find yourself in a position where your ability to tolerate bullshit, you know, excuse the language on the show, I apologize, but it goes down a lot. And you just have very little patience for trivialities and so on and so forth. And it makes the everyday stuff you see, you know, on in the media, or the things that, you know, people expect from you on the dating scene, it makes it very hard to tolerate, you know, once you get used to that. If you just take being alone, I used to be very afraid of being alone until about, you know, really COVID. I think COVID was really the point where most of us had to grapple with it, because you had to be at home. You know, you couldn't really interact the way we normally did. I don't think it was just me. I think there were a lot of men that once they found out they could be alone and the world didn't end, you know, I think that changed a lot for a lot of men, because you notice, you know, and it hit me. I remember I told a couple of my friends, I was like, I don't remember the last argument I've had. I cannot remember the last argument that I had. My house is quiet. You know, it's peaceful.
Well, yeah, I mean, you thought something was wrong not having a girlfriend, and we're going to get to this, but they're trying to push that mentality back by saying that, you know, men are lonely, but yeah, once you start to appreciate your personal peace and things being okay, and you being able to save your money and invest your money, and not live trying to measure up to the whims of somebody else and their grandiose ideas and their exorbitant standards, you know, then, you know, you realize, okay, there's life separate from that, and it's good.
No, it's that if you just took one thing, if we didn't say anything else, we didn't talk about weight, we didn't talk about, you know, anything else. If we just said, you have to bring peace to get into my space. Do you know how many relationships don't start? You know what I mean? Just if men just required even just that, it changes the entire experience. And there's a lot of folks that wouldn't be able to get past just that. You know, so I'm just saying there's a number of standards we could pick up. We could develop a list the way women do, but I would just say to men, if you just make peace a requirement, that is, if you yourself value that. If you don't, you don't. But, you know, if you could just make peace a standard, then you will accept nothing less from any woman that wants to be in your space. Watch how quickly your life changes, and watch how quickly, you know, a large population of women will not find people. Just making peace a standard.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is harder to explain to someone that's been married for 40 years. But it's a requirement now, I believe, that men need to be able to say something like that now because of the state of things. And you know, we can back it up empirically. If you look at the stress level, you look at the life expectancy of Black men, if you pay attention to all of that, there are real world implications and repercussions for not learning how to create a peaceful space in your own life. Most of us are not taught how to do that. We're not even taught to prioritize that. Many of the men I grew up with that you know, advocated for peace, they were in their 60s when I was coming up. These were old men that went through hell with multiple marriages and just found peace in solitude.
But if you can make peace a requirement, even in your 20s and moving forward, changes the whole dynamic. And I would just hope that men will consider doing that.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to the great feminization next.
Mm-hmm.
But I know people don't approve of everything he says, but I think Medium Man does some good work.
Mm-hmm.
I did thanks to him, I did start digging into the black men's life expectancy due to marriage piece. I did start reading that NIH report, and it turns out it doesn't necessarily prolong our lives, because one of the things you're told is, men who are married, they live longer. For us, the data don't seem to bear that out.
Yeah.
Okay. But we can get to that in another show.
I wasn't actually talking about life expectancy for black men being married. I was saying married men have a different experience, and when you try to explain to them why we have to approach the dating market differently, they don't understand why. That was what I was saying. But no, I'm a fan of Medium Man's channel. I agree.
Well, I was confronted with that years ago. She hasn't said it recently, but my mother, when I go home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, we talk about all these different things. And one time I was, married men live longer, so that's something that we're told,
right?
But it doesn't. It seems to be different for us.
Yeah,
that part we're not told, and I don't know if that report was out 10 years ago, but that's been measured. Okay.
Well, it's very reflective of what we've been trying to do in Black male studies. We've been trying to focus on the data as it relates to black men, which means pushing for the disaggregation of a lot of the data, because sometimes it's not disaggregated by race and gender, and sometimes by neither. So we've been pushing for that so that we can actually look empirically at how these things impact black men. And we've been doing that for really over the last decade, trying to do that same thing. So anybody that contributes to that mission, I appreciate. So,
okay. All right. Another topic of today is the Great Feminization. Okay. I read the article. I recently read the article leading up to this this discussion. So a white woman named Helen Andrews wrote an article called The Great Feminization.
Right.
I think I did leave the link below if anybody wants to read it if anyone wants to read it yourself. But you did a program on this yourself, a live stream, and you mentioned the canary in the coal mine parable. Do you want to talk about the significance of the Great Feminization to the black community and black men? Because I think you asserted that we've been dealing with this for years now.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, when you listen to Helen Andrews, talk about it, she's talking about it within the last 5 years. And, for many, it's revelatory, especially for the white community, just trying to come to grips with the extent to which feminism is reshaping dynamics within institutions, from organizations to families to government, so on and so forth. For those of us, in these spaces, having these conversations, we've been talking about this for the last 10 to 15 years, and we've been not using the same vocabulary really, but we really, we talk about the gynocracy, right? And we talk about that because in reality, we've seen the impact of feminization much earlier than they seem to have been talking about it. And we've watched it take place, and it's been tied to, policy and resources. And that's something I've been talking about for years now. This is not an accidental thing. So for the black community, we've watched women, be able to take advantage of opportunities that many of the men couldn't. And we've seen the shift in the family structure, right? When you talk about the rise of family courts, when you talk about the 1970s and 80s and the rise of single parent households, we saw the impact of that in the black community. And the black community was kind of always ahead of the white community when it came to some things like that, in single parent households with female led spaces, so on and so forth. These are things that we've experienced. When you talk to the average black man about black women in the community, about families, about growing up in families with no men present, these are not things that black men can't speak to you about. Too many of us can, and that's part of the issue. So as useful as I find the concept, because she took it to some places that I hadn't, and I appreciate that. When she started talking about how many industries are becoming female led, I appreciated that. She was talking about law and medicine and journalism and I was like, in psychology, I was like, I'm glad you said it. And Richard Reeves did something similar. He was talking about psychology, being over 90, it was either 95 or 99% female by 2030. I appreciated those observations, right? So I wasn't really looking at outside institutions. I was looking at the Black family. I was looking at Black dating life, Black family formation. I was looking at those kind of spaces. But, for us, this is not really a new experience. We can take it back to generations prior, but really it kicks into another groove in the late 60s and 70s and snowballs from there. So we've kind of been able to see this very differently for different sets of reasons. And I think that's one of the things I'm excited about by dealing with feminization, because now I'm able to contrast what the mainstream is just now starting to talk about with what we've been grappling with for decades. And I think that's going to be a very fruitful kind of conversation. And that's kind of where I was going with it in the last couple of shows. Because I just did a show the other night interviewing men who lost their jobs due to random accusations in the workplace from women that didn't have any evidence, nor did these men even get, introduced to their accusers, right? That's a product of feminization, right? Women are to be believed regardless of what they say, regardless of whether there's evidence or not. And these cases don't even get sent outside of the institution to law enforcement to be investigated. There is no objectivity. It's all about the whims of the institution. And at the end of the day, just like Helen Andrews pointed out, it's all predicated on her feelings. And if someone feels aggrieved, it is to be treated as if the situation occurred the way she said it, simply because she's crying. Well, this is a ludicrous concept, but there are men who've lost their careers, who found themselves in prison, all over the whims of a woman. And this idea that women are incapable of vengeance or incapable of acting out simply because people act like these things don't happen. But the reason I interviewed those men, I interviewed 3 of them, these were not celebrities. These were not politicians. These were everyday brothers who experienced a profound shift in their lives due to random women that were just on one. So as much as we like to act like this doesn't happen, when you give half the community the power to say whatever they want with no pushback and no checks and balances, you're going to be surprised when people abuse it. When a woman at work, when she hits on you and you don't take to that and respond well, and she can end your career and accuse you of violating her because she's upset that you weren't interested, right? When a woman can, these kinds of things have been happening, especially to Black men for the longest. But again, we're not allowed to talk about that. What is it? Hashtag believe all women. Ludicrous concepts, but they're nonetheless taken as gospel. And these things need to be pushed back against, but that doesn't happen until men themselves begin to push back. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I know that just that title, that probably came as a shock to a lot of people, having someone question that. What's wrong with feminization? What's wrong with most of our lawyers and our Supreme Court justices and our English departments? What's wrong with everything being female?
Right.
But from what I've read, and I've heard these talks over the years as well. There's a danger. There's a danger in breaking the Larry Summers piece, where it was understood that those comments were to be off the record. There's a danger to just those basic rules and agreements being broken based upon feelings.
But that was the surprising thing, because Helen Andrews actually pointed out, and I don't think any of us were really prepared, not only for a woman, not only for a white woman, but a conservative white woman, to be that honest, because she didn't just say that these institutions are becoming more female-led. She said the values and the culture of women is starting to take over, and really what I call, playground mean girl politics is coming into play, right? So, again, the emphasis on feelings, but more important than feelings, and this is what she didn't say, it's whose feelings get to be taken into account.
It's not men's feelings, and there's a hierarchy on women's feelings in terms of race that comes into play. So everybody doesn't get the same access as, say, middle-class white women. But the point is, middle-class white women's feelings take priority. What they feel aggrieved by, what they're fearful of, all of these things take priority over empiricism, over evidence, over hard documentation. And when that can happen, you're just subject to the whims of wherever they go emotionally. And none of that tends to work out in your favor very often, So, and I've been doing a lot of media analysis over the years. So I've also been looking at how we've all been conditioned in media to accept this programming, to accept this female, superiority dynamic. We've been watching, we could take it back. We just go with the 90s. From the talk shows to the sitcoms, the Married with Children's, like the dumb, idiotic men and the rational, brilliant woman. This dynamic has been played out so many times over the last 30 years over these in media on these micro levels. And we've seen so many instances of it where women are smarter, better, stronger, faster, more capable. We've seen this for so long, it doesn't even bother us to the extent that it probably should, because we've been programmed to accept it. And women have definitely been programmed to believe their own hype, right? So I was surprised that there's Helen Andrews, there's Amy Wax. I just kind of showcased a leftist white woman who's talking about feminization. So it's not even limited to one side of the ideological argument anymore. But I was surprised that these women were coming forward and confronting this and being that honest, because they were actually arguing, and Andrews is included in this, that the standards that women are using is tamping down the productivity of these institutions, because they're no longer based on productivity. They're no longer based on set goals. They're based on feelings. They're based on group consensus. She's saying these are impacting the quality of what's being produced. I did not expect to hear a woman be that honest about it. Usually a woman wouldn't even admit to feminization, and to the extent that they would talk about it solely as a beautiful thing. I mean, hell, even Scott Galloway talks about it as a beautiful thing. Oh, we should applaud the women that are doing so much and they've come so far. Bullshit. They've come so far because we've set the framework to allow them to. We've rigged the game for them to advance. They didn't advance just because they woke up one day and did it. Everything was rigged for them to do so. But for Helen Andrews to contradict Scott Galloway by saying, let's be honest about what this type of approach does to the quality of what's being produced. And she says it in that article, and you saw that. She says, I'm paraphrasing, the law will not survive women. You remember when she says that in the article?
Yep.
The law will not survive it. You know what I mean? I didn't expect anywhere near that much honesty. If anything, I thought that would have come from the manosphere before Helen Andrews. And to some extent it did, depending on which manosphere you're talking about. But I didn't expect to hear a woman be that honest about it. And she is ruthless. She is, man, some of them, Amy Wax is doing the same thing in the academy. These women are ruthless calling this out. And they're telling you, we need to get back to male standards. And I'm like, damn.
Well, first of all, shout out to Passport OG, because in his offerings, one of the themes he keeps hitting on is we're falling further and further behind China by prioritizing this consensus, relativistic thinking.
Yes.
Believe, feelings over facts type thing. So he continuously points that out. But I think another thing you pointed out is that when these women have sons, there's something about having sons that makes them think differently than had they not had sons. Well,
shout out to BGS. He said it, over a decade ago. He said at the end of the day, women, kind of see things in terms of their nest. And, so he was talking about, they filter a lot of their worldview through their nest. So they didn't really become, empathetic for men until it hit home. You know what I mean? And when their little boys start losing opportunities, because that's really not necessarily with Helen Andrews, but definitely, I think it was Carol Hooven is the name of the woman that I introduced. She's on the left, former professor of Harvard, but she was pushing back against feminization in the video I showed. And when you really get her talking, she starts talking about her son at a certain point. And then you can see how she's interpreting this. It's not because it's principally wrong
that misandry is taking root in institutions. That's not how she's coming at this. She's coming at this emotionally, and you can see her break down in her talk. She's a professor. She knows how to talk, but when she gets to talking about it, she can't find the words because this is not a logical, theoretical framework for her. This is coming out of an emotional experience watching her son starting to experience the blowback of feminization. And this is what's, and I think in many ways, this is what the Scott Galloways and the Richard Reeves, these are some of the women they're trying to appeal to, because they make these emotional appeals all the time. Your boys aren't going to be able to advance. They're playing video games and they're stuck in their rooms. These are emotional ploys being used by the Scott Galloways to get liberal women to feel sorry for their own sons and to get up and advocate for policy that'll help men by extension. I don't think it can work that way, but I understand what they're doing, and that's who they're trying to appeal to. The Helen Andrews, that's a whole different camp. I don't think she has kids. But either way, when you listen to her, it's not an emotional plea that she's making. She's saying this is bullshit and it's affecting our productivity. And if we don't stop, these institutions will collapse. That is a very different argument. A very different argument. Amy Wax in the Academy doing the same thing. Conservative old woman who talks about watching the Academy become more feminized, watching the emphasis on empiricism drop, watching the quality of what's being produced by scholars drop. Very different discussion than we need to make space for our sons who will not have jobs and will not have families if we don't change things. Very different argument.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I might have misheard her, but I thought Andrew said she did have sons.
I didn't know. No, I'm saying I don't know. I'm not saying she does or I said I don't know, but what I am saying is her argument is an emotional one. It's not an emotional one, excuse me. Carol Hooven's argument is very emotional. Andrews is it's cutthroat. It's very much a different positioning of the argument. She's not really making emotional pleas in the same kind of way. If you watch Carol Hooven, the video I posted on my show, I think yesterday, or Monday, I think it was, and then watch Helen Andrews or Amy Wax, very different approach. And Scott Galloway is much more like Carol Hooven in that respect. The emotionality is it kind of takes over one set of arguments, and it's a very different one coming from the other camp.
Okay.
I didn't know Andrews had a son, so I didn't know.
Okay, I could be wrong. I was going to ask you about Galloway and Reeves, but it's you answered that one as well. It sounds like you're hearing them advocating or asking liberal women to help the boys. That's what they're doing. Because when Galloway gets up there and talks, it's kind of like he's talking out of this side. He's talking out of this side. Women are doing great. We're not asking to undo that. We're not touching that. But boys are struggling. Boys are gonna, we're developing these asexual, antisocial creatures, and it's gonna come back and haunt all of us. So he's like talking off this side, and he's talking off out of. It's weird listening to him talk.
And then in his final analysis, he'll just say young men need to man up, right? He
man up, economically viable.
He won't hold women accountable at all. And so that's one of the reasons that there are a lot of men that take issue with him and Reeves. When they spout the stats that men are experiencing, men are not upset by that. I appreciate the stats. I appreciate the data. But when you're unwilling to hold women accountable and you're just going to look at a 15-year-old kid and say he just needs to buck up, I'm looking at you like, this is a problem, man. This is a disingenuous argument. At some point you need to be honest. And again, we come back to feminization. Be real about the shit. What is the impact that these practices are having on men and boys? And if you're not willing to speak to that, you're going to have problems getting respect from certain groups of men that appreciate honesty. It's not that men are looking to be catered to and coddled, but it is, if we're going to have this discussion, let's at least be honest. And that's one of the reasons these male spaces have formed, whether you're talking about Black male studies or the manosphere or men's studies in general in the academy, although some of that, depending on which camp you're looking at, was feminist led. But in the male led spaces, men are looking for real conversations rooted in truth, not in what caters to women's egos. You know what I mean? That's going to be the Kevin Samuels versus Derek Jackson kind of dynamic. And men don't respect the Derek Jackson approach. Men respect honesty. You can't just be honest about men's failings and then completely sidestep women's contributions to this. It does not work. And in the Black community, that's what we've been told to do for generations. Men have been told to fall on their swords, be quiet, buck up, be the man that women want, protect, provide, be quiet, do what. It's not working anymore. You actually have to operate from a genuine space when having these conversations with men about their roles, or else men are going to go elsewhere and create families that they can't create in their own communities. This approach it doesn't work. That whole argument doesn't work anymore. So,
okay. So, Dr. T, so we're almost at the end. I want to ask you about the dictionary, just really quickly from the Academy, from the Black Masculinist lens. All year we've heard about how many Black women have lost jobs, while the rest of society has become better employed. So, are you seeing through your data at the Academy? Are you seeing that Black men have been relatively stable employment wise? While this bloodbath has been taking place?
I'm a bit out of the loop. I'm a bit of an outcast, a bit of a pirate. I'm not tied into a lot of that, but no.
Yeah.
On the student level, I see a drop in admissions. I see a drop in institutions investing and having Black men present.
Okay.
When they do say they're going to invest in having Black students, it often ends up being women. But in terms of faculty, I can't really say I haven't seen any major shift one way or the other, but I don't hear any rhetoric around advocating for men and supporting men. I can't say I hear that.
Okay. All right. We're gonna I'm gonna ask you about the some of your the vocabulary words that some of these are in your book. And then these are words that you've mentioned on your show. And again, I think it's going back to my uncle's question or his comment about we need to get rid of all this gender stuff. I want to thank you and applaud you for giving words to things that we've experienced throughout our lives, but up to this point we haven't had a vocabulary for, that's allowed us to understand these things and it's allowed us to deal with them and address them in ways that we see fit. I'm going to show you a picture here. This emerged yesterday. Have you seen this? I think this kind of sets this up. I'm not going to play this. This is from MTR. But this is Damon. I can't think of his last name. But apparently,
Brandon Jamal.
Sorry,
the guy in the middle, Brandon Jamal.
Yeah, Brandon Jamal. Brandon's not Damon. Yeah. Brandon Jamal. But his cousin there, apparently. So Jasmine Crockett's running for Senate.
Yeah.
And amongst his family, this gentleman is called Jasmine Crockett an idiot. And apparently, if the story's true, his cousin attacked him.
Right.
Okay. And I thought that this would be the perfect segue into some of these terms we're going to talk about, because number one, we always think of violence from Black men towards Black women.
Right.
Okay. So there's that piece. She apparently attacked him, scratched his face up, and he had to subdue her. He has a wrestling background. But what stood out to me is that she snapped because he called Jasmine Crockett an idiot.
Right.
And this political thing, this political thing, this liberal political, you can't talk about our female Black politicians. That's what this represented to me. That she was willing, she was so in defense of Jasmine Crockett that she had to put her hands on her cousin. So I just want to tell all the guys, maybe part of this is be careful. Maybe part of this is we're fair game. If we don't necessarily necessarily like Kamala Harris or Jasmine Crockett or
Well,
Maxine. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we saw that last year, right? I mean, even though black men voted for Kamala in the second highest numbers out of any other demographic, to the extent that black men were public about their criticisms, we saw a lot of hostility, particularly from black women and from the left in general, directed at men. I mean, Obama came out and pointed to black men directly before, the election took place as being the problem because we were too sexist to accept the idea of a black woman president. I mean, we've seen the hostility already, but I think your boy or our boy Jeff St. James made the observation before. I didn't look at it as Brandon Jamal's situation just in terms of her being a politician or it being a political issue. We're not allowed to talk about black women, period. And I think Jeff St. James pointed that out in one of his shows where he was listing the things that you're not supposed to do. I think that's kind of, I think that's really a lot of where that came from. And I think that's been the frustration at men having these discussions. And it just culminated in a hatred toward Kevin Samuels because he became the face of black men being critical of black women. But I think the idea that many of us, were raised in the black community is that you can't talk about mama. You can't talk about black women. You have to, whatever she did was, ultimately done for the best of reasons. And that's as far as you're allowed to take it. So when you do criticize either feminism or black women, there's not only something wrong with you, but you're identified as a sexist and a misogynist just on the grounds of providing a criticism. That's it. I think that's where a lot of that goes. But, in terms of what Brandon experienced, I can't say it's new. I think what's new is that he was willing to post the pictures and talk about it online. And to my understanding, call the police.
Yeah.
File a restraining order. That part, I think, is the new component to it. I think he's in some respect, he might be representing a shift in how men respond to physical violence. I mean, I think one of the reasons, women are extremely violent. But I think the reason they're extremely violent is there's been no collective idea that their violence is abuse. Women do not see their violence as abuse. Abuse, and this is the influence of the Duluth model in this, abuse is just what men do to women. What women do to men, as far as women are concerned, it shouldn't matter whether she's punching you with fists or pulling out a baseball bat. They don't consider that violence. It's when you grab the bat and then respond. Everything that, like, you'll notice if there's an argument that takes place, and especially if it gets abusive, because we know in the black community, intimate partner violence is bidirectional, meaning it comes from both directions almost equally. But, most black women don't regard any of that. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't matter what led up to the incident. It could have been 20 minutes of her berating him, hitting him, throwing things at him, attacking him, drawing blood. None of it matters until he responds. That's when the clock starts on what they consider abusive. That's what the recording might be, if there is one, that they'll put forth to the public, but they won't show you what happened a half hour up to that, right? And so I think a lot of what happened to Brandon is coming out of that culture that a woman can do whatever she wants and it's not really considered a problem. It's not considered assault. It's not considered abuse. It's none of that. It's only what he does to her. And that kind of dynamic is what I think a lot of men are pushing against in this last decade. We're starting to examine the double standards and call them out.
Yeah. So in his account, assuming it was accurate, apparently when he restrained her, he tackled her and restrained her, she was calling out to what his mother and her mother and his mother, or her mother and the grandmother, saying, "Hey, you guys are going to let him restrain me?" So in other words, I should be able to put my hands on him.
Right.
And he shouldn't, you guys should come and get him. He's the one who's wrong for restraining me. Right. So that really.
And I didn't get the impression that they did anything to stop her from attacking him before he had to restrain her.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get the impression anybody stood up to do that. And it does, and they can be quick about it when they want to. I mean, think back to when you were younger and a little girl hit you. I mean, this is something I've seen on the playground 100 times. There'll be a boy and a girl the girl will hit the boy. Women will come from everywhere to grab the boy to keep him from responding.
Yeah.
The girl will not get punished at all. As a matter of fact, some of them will even smile that she's tough and she don't take no mess. But they will come from out of the blue
to stop the boy from potentially responding. And this is at a time when boys and girls are roughly the same strength.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, she might even be a little bit older and stronger and more coordinated, but they'll still make sure that he doesn't respond and then give him a talking to, if not a spanking, if he did manage to respond physically to what she initiated. That kind of child, that kind of schoolyard dynamic that we've seen 100 times in family settings and whatnot in the Black community, that's still at play as an adult. I am a little surprised that the women didn't stop him from restraining her, but if he went full fisticuffs, I fully believe they would have. But nobody, I don't think, and according to the story I heard him tell, nobody had anything to say about her hitting him.
Well, Dr. Johnson, I think both genders have a hard time conceiving women's violence. Okay, it being bidirectional. One of my partners, I was describing one of your live streams about bidirectional violence and the fact that women actually put their hands on men as well. And my homeboy's reaction was, what is this? I better not hear. I don't want to hear nothing about you hitting a woman. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not what it was about. It was about the fact that it's bidirectional,
right?
But we're so programmed to only think of it as unidirectional,
right?
And so there's almost no concept that a woman could put her hands on a man or be violent towards men.
Yeah,
it's a misnomer.
One of the vocabulary terms, as you call it, I developed was the black male dual economy. Yeah. And I talk about us essentially as Black men living under a different economy for a reason. There are these old videos, and I believe they're still on YouTube, that I used to show in class. And they're actors, and they go to public places and they act out scenes to gauge people's responses. They're usually couples. They pretend to be couples, right? So it'll be a male and a female, and they'll do some scenes where he's abusing a woman in public, and then they'll do others where a woman is abusing him in public, a man. And you get to watch the reactions. 9 times out of 10, in a public space, if a man is putting hands on women, other men and women will come attack him. Not just restrain him, attack him. Other men will go fist to fist, toe to toe, and there might be a 3-to-1 jumping off simply because they're trying to prevent this man from attacking a woman. When it's the opposite and a woman is attacking a man, nobody moves. If anything, there have been instances where they'll form a crowd around the couple, and most of the people in the crowd are laughing at the man who's getting hit. See, that's the dynamic. So that's why I call it a dual economy. We live under a different set of rules. You know what I mean? If there's even a chance you'll respond, people will come fight you to prevent you, even in self-defense, from dealing with a woman who's being violent. If it's the reverse, there's no response. And I've even had men try to argue with me. Well, ain't nothing a woman can do to me. I'd be like, what if she shoots you? What if she pulls a weapon on you? You ever heard of hot grease?
Hot grease. Hot sugar water.
Hot sugar water. Attack you in your sleep. Cut your penis off. Like, what? Are we really going to act like women are incapable of doing you serious damage because you got your chest thumped out? Don't get it twisted. Human beings can be extremely dangerous. Children can be extremely dangerous if you get in the wrong situations. I don't underestimate anybody. I don't care. It is what it is. Once you read enough of the data, you don't take nobody light, because in the right situation, anybody can hurt you. But we just have this societal belief that women can't and won't, and it's ridiculous. And it has never been true. So.
Yeah. I'm going to read this super chat, and then we will move on to the end. I want to thank Katarolnu 510 for the $5 super chat. Says Scott Galloway has a way of speaking about the boys and men as if they can't help but push on the pull door. It's low key condescending.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think Dr. Thunder has entered the chat. Salute to Dr. Thunder. All the doctors are coming out tonight. He says, 2 of my favorite people, take some of my sandwich money. Thank you, Dr. Thunder, for that sandwich money. So, Dr. Johnson, I gave Dr. Neal the Peter King treatment from the Hoover Institute. I don't have a passage to read, but I do have your terms listed out here. So, we'll just go over a few. I mean, if
Okay.
there's one in particular I want to ask you about.
Oh wow. Okay.
I think I've heard you mention pit bullying before.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
exactly is pit bullying?
Well, that's just basically when a woman pits a man against another man, right? And we see this in childhood, and then it snowballs into adulthood. You remember when you were in school as a kid, and a girl might say, "I'm gonna go get my big brother,"
Yeah.
or "I'm gonna go get my cousins," or whatever. That's pit bullying. When in an adult setting, it's really no different, but it can very quickly lead to death. I mean, these things happen all the time, and some women, really get off on being able to flex. I mean, to them, it's a flex to be able to get one man to hurt another. So it can be over something arbitrary. He took my place in line, or he said something about my shoes. It can really be that arbitrary, where she'll bring somebody up, a boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend, a brother, a relative. He might be out of prison. He might, it doesn't matter. And to me, it doesn't really show much love for the men she's calling either, because there have also been incidents where a woman will call a man to beat up a man she's offended by. Guns are pulled, lives are lost, and she caused it in many respects. And now it's one thing if you have a woman that's being violated, who's calling for help. That's not what we're talking about. You know what I mean? If your little sister got beat up by her boyfriend, for no reason, he's just on one, or he was high on drugs or whatever. I'm not saying there's never a reason to protect the women in your life. But when that's abused and somebody is calling on a man to bring violence to another one simply because, that's when I call it pit bullying. And we've seen a lot of that, right? But that's essentially what that is. And the reason we developed these terms, my whole channel was dedicated to that for the last number of years, creating a vocabulary that suits our experiences, is because without the term to make sense of it, we see a lot of stuff happening, but we don't always know how to frame it. You know what I mean? So once you frame it, and once you're able to describe it in a certain way, it makes a lot more sense. And now we can be critical of it. So if you see a woman abusing her power, right, of being able to call in people to operate on her behalf and bring violence to another person, especially over arbitrary, things, yeah, that's pit bullying, and that needs to be called out.
Yeah, that can happen within families too.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of men have gone to jail and lost their lives because of that.
Yes. Yeah. And she'll go about her way and live her life the way she was going to live it the day before anyway. But somebody's in jail and somebody's dead, and and it really is just a profound loss in many respects. But yeah.
I was particularly tickled by war councils. How about black leashing and blue leashing?
Okay. So blue leashing is basically when a woman uses law enforcement. It's somewhat like pit bullying, but instead of calling another man, she's calling in law enforcement. So it might be the police, especially if she calls and makes up a false accusation. He hit me, or he has a gun and he tried to kill me. That she brings the police to operate on her behalf under false pretenses. That's kind of way. Or it could be courts. If you've gone to family court and she fabricates a lie that you touched your children so she could get custody, that's a form of blue leashing. She's using law enforcement on her behalf, usually under false pretenses, to have her way at your expense. Or you might find yourself in jail. You might find yourself on a child registry, as a pedophile, any of those kind of things that can happen simply because she can, right? So those are all different forms of blue leashing, and I've seen a lot of that growing up. So yeah, that can happen in a lot of different ways. But yeah, that's essentially what that is.
And black leashing?
Yeah, black leashing is really, this is actually a term that one of the gentleman in my comment section brought up on the video I posted where I did blue leashing, and he was talking about the use of criminality in crime in that same way. Like hardcore criminals being called in. So not calling your brother to go beat somebody up or the police to go beat somebody up. Wow. But if you have a local gang, to beat, what I mean? Black leashing involves actually, instead of law enforcement, you're using criminal entities to operate on your behalf, for as far as a woman. trying to attack another man using criminal entities. And again, usually under false pretenses. It's a form of flexing that she can do simply because she can do. If she has those relationships and she's able to do it, I've seen women do it just because it's Tuesday and they like that they could call somebody in to do something. You know what I mean? I used to work with women like that when I was younger, and I'd be working at, little jobs here and there. And a woman just got off on the fact that, well, if you say one more word, I'm gonna call such and such. And it's like, okay, this was just a break room argument. You trying to get somebody killed because you mad about something, you know what I mean? But as much as that sounds like I'm being dismissive, that's real. So when you calling in, gangsters, gang members, anything involved in the underworld to operate on your behalf, again, in response to usually, false pretenses, that's what we call blackleashing.
Okay, I'm going to read this comment from Trust. She says, I absolutely love that Dr. Johnson has provided such a framework for necessary conversations. Okay.
Appreciate that.
And AP, the analytical pragmatist, says, I need a copy of these terms. One of my subsequent questions was, do you have these consolidated or listed out somewhere on your blog or?
No, maybe that's a blog entry I should do, but some of them are, as you said, they're in the book. So if you go through the index, you can find some of them. Others I've done shows about. So you can literally put my name in and put the concept in, and they'll probably bring up a show. But there are likely times where I've included the term in a show and it may not be in the title. And so, so maybe I do need to do a blog on that. But, the purpose around creating those terms was so that we could actually begin to make sense of the things we're experiencing by calling them out and explaining them. And I think the idea, because where that started for me is in graduate school, I used to have feminist professors that would say, just use feminism. Feminism will work for everybody. It's universal. It works for everybody, and so on and so forth. And I found that those terms didn't work for everybody. It didn't operate the same way, all the time. And for the most part, I think Black men need to develop their own terminology to explain their own circumstances and situations. I think it needs to happen politically, and that's why we have the Black male political agenda. I think it needs to happen socially, which is why we have these terms. But it needs to happen in these ways so we can make sense of our own reality outside of women's approval of what they think we should talk about, how they think we should speak. And, we need to be able to operate from our own, vantage point.
Okay. So everybody, I have Dr. Johnson here tonight. He talks about these things on his show regularly. So let's do a few more. How about Black male andro mortality?
Yeah, that's one I cover in the book. And andro mortality, I did that on YouTube, actually, the first time I did it.
Okay.
And what it is I was just trying to assess what the various different causes of death for Black men were. And, not causes of death, but the most extreme causes of the highest number of Black male deaths. So what you'll notice in the chapter in the book, what I do is I highlight each and every area that I think is significant in regard to Black male death, cancer, HIV, AIDS, suicide, like you name it. And I list those categories and I give the data that was available at that time in regard to those. That's what that was. It was an attempt to just assess how Black men experience death and what are the leading, issues that lead to our deaths and to what extent. Because I hadn't seen it done anywhere. And I think Black men are such a unique category where we have such a unique experience that it's required. And that's what the goal of that chapter was. So that's what Black andro mortality is. It's andro being male, mortality referring to death. What are the issues that we suffer from in regard to death? Usually at much higher rates than other demographics. Especially when you start talking about colon cancer and things. A lot of things they can't seem to explain why we die more from. Those are things that I think we need to talk about explicitly, because when we talk about death in regard to the Black community, it's usually generic in that way, unless it applies to women. Like if we talk about breast cancer, we treat that as a woman's issue. And it should be, because the majority of breast cancer, those with breast cancer are women, but there are men that suffer from breast cancer. But we don't think of breast cancer as a male issue. It's mostly a woman's issue. But when it comes to things that lead to death for Black men in greater numbers, it's usually kind of talked about as just a Black issue. And this is part of what I mean when I talk about flat Blackness, which is another of the concepts you have up there in the book. What I notice is when Black men suffer from it, it's a Black issue that affects the whole community. When Black women suffer from it, it's a Black woman's issue, and we need to pay it special attention. But we don't talk about what leads to Black male death because that takes attention away from other demographics. And over the last decade in the academy, there are groups that have complained that heterosexual Black men get too much attention, and that other groups, LGBT and women, need to get that attention more, even though heterosexual Black males often are the ones dying the most, right? So andromortality was my response to that, to say, no, fuck all of that. We're going to look at the numbers in regard to Black male death. And it's not limited to heterosexual Black males. It's just Black males. But we're going to look at what leads to our deaths in the most numbers and in what areas. And I don't care if people like it or don't like it, because men are dying. And this needs to be acknowledged.
Okay, I'm going to put the list back up. There was a term Dr. Neal called those groups. Oh, well, I'll figure it out later. Okay. But it he was basically getting to what you just described, that Black men are not prioritized versus the other protected groups. And they're anyway. Let's do a few more. Sure. Because of course it was just over 2 hours here. How about there was one Black gynopedestal family. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, the gynopedestal. So the D should be a T. Basically, what I was acknowledging there was that usually what we find, or what I'm seeing a lot of in this last couple of decades in the Black community, is not just female-led households or single-parent households. I'm now seeing families comprised of multiple women-headed households, right? So you have the grandmother, you have her daughters, you have their cousins, and you'll have these satellites, right, where each person has their own not necessarily a house, but their own household, right? And it's female-led, right? So if you have a family full of women like I did, right, that you got Big Mama's house, your mother's house, your auntie's house, your cousin's house, your sister, each one of these people have their own houses. And usually they're heads of their own households. And a lot of the time you'll find that these families don't have men. They have babies, they have boyfriends, and they even have sons whose labor is often shared amongst this community of women, where men will be passed around to some extent, whether it's for entertainment purposes, whether it's for fixing things, but you have this kind of idea that the way the family should be structured is as a series of satellites, that operate in a framework where they're mostly female-led. Now, gynopedestal is a kind of adjustment from matropedestal. So matropedestal are matriarchal families where you have that same kind of dynamic. They're women-led households, all under the auspices of a central elder woman. Gynopedestal is a little different because, as we acknowledge, Black women's position in our community here, it's not like matriarchies around the world. And one of the main differences is that it's not a naturally forming dynamic. It's a product of Western influence, Western policy, and Western resources. The only reason we have such high numbers of female-led households is in response to the kind of resource distribution in the Black community from the government, from society in this last half century. These things aren't naturally forming. So we call the gynocracy, it's a non-natural formation in the Black community. That's a direct response to resources that come from the state and policies for that matter as well. And gynopedestal just speaks to that, kind of a multi-household dynamic that operates in families. It's not led by mothers per se, because a matriarchy is led by, elder women. And what I argue in the Black community is it's led by women. So you'll have different ages, you'll have different levels of status, but women are the functional component in that dynamic, not necessarily, mothers in a hierarchical format. There was a video I posted on my Facebook page a few years ago, and I showed it in one of my shows, but I can't find it. And it was a man in his late 20s, and he was talking about his family
and how the women in his family, led the family, and they were doing some kind of family reunion at a certain point, and his little sister came in and gave him a list of things he needed to bring to the family reunion. And I remember he was frustrated. It was kind of funny, but he was joking, but he wasn't. He said, when the fuck did my little sister, surpass me in authority in my family? But really what he was speaking to was a gynecomasculine framework. His little sister, who in terms of status and age is below him, she surpassed him because she was female. So the women that headed the family and made all the decisions brought her in to this leadership framework and left him out. And so he's now reduced to bringing plates and cups to the family reunion, as opposed to being in a decision-making capacity with the elders of the family making decisions. That is just a brief example, but that's what I'm talking about when I look at gynecomasculinity. It's not necessarily mother-led, it's female-led. It's not dependent on age or status per se. Gender plays a much stronger role. And a lot of that has to do with how much access women have had, resources, as I pointed out, and I talk about this extensively in the book, that men didn't often get. I mean, in the 1990s, when my friends and I were graduating from undergrad, we were looking for jobs wherever we could find them. I knew quite a few women, and of course, this is not empirical. I'm just talking about this just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. I knew women that had English degrees, but $120,000 jobs as consultants for corporations. They had no training in anything related to what they were hired for, but they were able to get these jobs with a bachelor's degree in English, serving as a consultant for a tech company. And it was like, and I remember these women, especially in LA, they'd have these nice lofts and 2-bedroom houses. And you're like, how are you 23 with a bachelor's degree in a 2-story house and a 6-figure income with an English degree, and you're consulting for Apple? You know what I mean? Like, what? But I used to see that kind of thing a lot more than I ever saw men in those positions. It's just a brief example. I'm not saying that that's empirically bad. I'm just saying those are the kinds of things many men have reported to me. And those are the things I've seen myself, where women were able to get a certain degree of access that men couldn't. I mean, I remember being halfway through college, and my little sister, who hadn't even started college yet, was able to get jobs that paid more than what I could get halfway through college. Same thing happened when I graduated. I had a master's degree. My wife and I went to temp agencies when we moved to Oakland. She got jobs the next day. It took 6 months for them to call me. And even when they did, I was loading boxes at a factory. There's a difference in the gender experience in the Black community as it pertains to certain things. And we just have to be able to be forthright about what that difference is and how we've experienced it.
Okay. All right. We'll do 2 more.
Mm-hmm.
And I fixed my slide. So
Okay.
Ghana for Tesla has a T now. Misty wants to know what war councils are.
I don't think that one is particularly mine. I think I kind of stole that. That was and I didn't mean it. It wasn't formal. I don't think I ever formally took the term, but it came from the Spike Lee film. Damn
Was
it,
it Jungle Fever?
Jungle Fever, yes. And yep. I can't remember who was talking about it, but the War Council was when the women were frustrated and they had that session. And according to, if I remember correctly, I don't think Spike wrote that. I think the women just did it. And they had this conversation about what they were frustrated with Black men. And somebody referred to it as a War Council, and it just fit. I remember laughing about it. But years later, I can say as an aside, I was frustrated that I don't think I'd ever seen a movie where Black men had a chance to articulate their frustrations. Mm-hmm. So even with movies like that, trying to be funny and trying to, I think part of the problem with what they did is they presented to the world that we have a one-way problem in the Black community as it relates to relationships and gender dynamics. And that is that men fail women. That's it. Black men don't have a leg to stand on in terms of having any serious frustrations or any reasons to be critical of women. It's just, because there's a politics to who gets the mic, so to speak. So in a movie like that ends up, making statements about Black relationships, and it's similar with The Color Purple and a number of those Terry McMillan films that came out, who gets the mic in terms of articulating their frustrations is the one that people take seriously. So as far as the world was concerned, between the 80s and 90s, when, in regard to the Black community and relationships, the problem had to be Black men, because the only people we're hearing from complaining about it is women, and they're articulating their issues
at length, right? If you watch that war council, they were accusing black men of colorism. They were accusing black men of, they had a list of things they were frustrated about. Is he employed? Is he taking care of his family? Is he taking care of his children? They have a list. And so it's really one of these things people develop, in absentia. Like if we don't hear what men's concerns are, they must not exist. And if we only hear women's concerns, they must be the only ones that are relevant. And so I was kind of, when I thought about that, it's probably about 5 years ago, I was a little pissed at Spike. I'm like, dude, man, you're a black male filmmaker, man. Especially in the 90s, it would have been incredible to actually hear men articulate the frustrations other men had, especially at that time, because we didn't have a platform. So I go back to Eddie Murphy talking about Johnny Carson getting divorced and losing half. You know what I mean? The moment he spoke on that, men lost their minds because we didn't have a lot of avenues for that. There were certain hip hop artists or comedians like Chris Rock. Chris Rock was good for that. You know what I mean? But sometimes you had to wait for certain artists to articulate something, but we didn't have a larger stage, and we were quick to see black women have that kind of opportunity, and we didn't, so it made it harder for us to really figure out what the hell was going on, because all we heard was that we were the problem in these black women's lives. And you had generations of black girls raised on the idea that black men were a problem and that they contributed nothing worthy of criticism. So all the fingers just have to point to black men, and that's it. So when black men start pushing back within the last decade, you have a lot of people that are like, who the hell are you to push back on us? We don't have any problems. Y'all are the ones with the problems. Well, they've had 20, 30 years of conditioning to teach them that we were the only ones that had problems. We were the bane of their existence. They've done nothing to be a problem because they've never heard that they were a problem. So I think that's kind of where that came from. But war councils came from Jungle Fever.
Okay. Well, I know that I think maybe it was in your discussion with Jeff, you described them in your family too, where the women huddled up and said, okay, well, you call the police or you could take them to court or whatever. But that's what that is when they put their heads together and start exchanging information. And
do you grow up in a family of women as a little kid? It's just Tuesday. It just, whether it's your mother on the phone with her girlfriend, whether it's, her bringing her girls over and they're all drinking wine in the living room. You're told to go to your room, but you come down for a glass of water. You hear this. I mean, it's just something you grow up hearing. But it's one thing to have it happen while you're growing up. It's another thing to see it in a movie broadcast to the world. And yet when men have frank conversations, like for example, in the barbershop, particularly about relationships and women, it's either dismissed as comedy if it comes up in a film at all, or it's not brought up at all. But it's as if to say men can't have credible conversations with real valid arguments about how they're treated in relationships that should be taken seriously. That's not what happens. It falls in that Al Bundy Married with Children time period I was talking about earlier, where men had to be buffoons and idiotic and women were these angelic beings that floated on high. That dynamic, in order for it to sustain itself, for the most part, had to eliminate men's voices. And I think many suffered from that because we grew up believing that men can't have any relevant complaints because women are fundamentally perfect. Really, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last two, and I think these are self-explanatory, but these certainly hit home. The emotional labor, because I specifically remember being taught by my mom, be attentive to, if you're seeing someone, be attentive to her moods, be sensitive to what she's going through,
right.
Be there. So male relationship, emotional labor, and one-way traditionalism.
Okay, so I'll start with one-way traditionalism. So basically, that's a dynamic we've all been hearing about, especially in social media for years now. Women want men who protect and provide, right? Those were the traditional roles that men provided in a relationship. Well, the traditional roles of women were what? Domesticity, cleaning, cooking, taking care of the household, women will call that slavery, but they'll still tell you that men should protect and provide as if it's 1950. That's one-way traditionalism. Women have no problem saying they want men to be traditional, but they want women to be whatever the hell they want women to be. Women can have kids, not have kids. They can adopt. They can stay virgins. They can, they can work. They can not work. They can work part-time. They can have businesses. They can just be housewives. Women want the option to do whatever they want to do, but they want to hold men to the 1950s and then shame men who question whether or not they should. And I think it's an inevitability that people would question it, because if women were going to absolve themselves of having any static role to play in a relationship, you can't turn around and tell men that they need to be stuck in time. It doesn't work that way. It's like a woven sweater. Once you start pulling that fabric, the whole thing's going to come apart. And women really don't want to accept that when they started pulling from that fabric. You can't ask men to stay in the same place when you refuse to be held accountable in any way. So that's precisely what's been happening.
Well, Dr. T, isn't this what's at the root of the 50-50
yes.
thing? I'll just call it a thing.
Oh, yeah. The 50-50 is looked down upon. You need to be providing 100%. The real difference, though, is, and I said this earlier, women have started to demand those wifely privileges from the first meeting, from the first date. You need to start paying her bills. Well, usually that was reserved for married women, but they want that even earlier. So it's not even traditionalism that they're requesting. It's almost hyper traditionalism that they're asking for men. But when it comes to men asking for traditionalism, it's regarded as oppressive. You know what I mean? So when a woman can say to you, look, if we're going to go out on a date and I tell you I need to get my nails done, you need to volunteer money for me to do that for the date that we're going to go on. You need to get my nails and you need to pay for my hair and my shoes and my makeup. And if you're not willing to do all of that, then, and I said this on Facebook, the equivalent of that is like me saying, okay, we're going to go on a date, but there's a lot of dirty dishes in my kitchen. So I'm a little upset that you didn't volunteer to come over and wash them before our date. That's about as idiotic as that shit sounds to men, right? But women are oblivious to that much of the time. Not all women, but many. But the idea fundamentally is that men need to be stuck in time and provide by traditional standards that women don't live by, and that those standards should only be applied to men while women do whatever the hell they feel like. That's never going to work. The other concept, male relationship, emotional labor, that was something that came about. It was initially a Facebook post, but I was watching a movie, and the movie was it was called Julie and Julia, I think it was. But anyway, it's about Julia Childs, and this is a famous chef on TV who apparently was barren. She couldn't have children. And so they were covering her life, and there was a moment where she got a letter from her sister who was pregnant. So she's sitting in this room with her husband, and she's reading this letter, and her husband is listening to this, and he's paying attention to her body language. She's starting to break down, as you would expect, right? This is a woman who can't have kids, and her own sister is now pregnant. And she's happy for her sister, but she's, falling apart because she couldn't have kids. And the reason I say this is where the concept came from is, as I'm watching the movie, on autopilot, I start talking to the screen, and I found that I was saying the exact same things the husband was saying. And the reason that's important is because, as I mentioned with my wife earlier, we did have one child successfully, but we lost 3 pregnancies. So there was a time before my son was born where we had lost 2 pregnancies, one of which was stillborn. So I held my daughter. She was born, gone. Everything was there. She was small. She was born at 6.5 months. Hair, eyelashes, fingernails, everything was perfect. And the doctor scared the hell out of me because he was like, well, just be ready. She may come out in pieces. That scared the hell out of me. But she was fine. She was just small. And I'm holding this girl who was supposed to be my daughter. She'd have been 5 years older than my son. And from that moment forward, my wife was like this woman as far as pregnancy. If she saw women pushing babies walking down the street, she'd fall out in tears. If we were watching a movie and somebody had a baby, she would be out of work for 3 days at home in bed. So what we ended up developing was this sort of unspoken dance
where you know, if the next movie that was about to come on TV was something revolving around pregnancy, I would distract her, make her laugh, change the channel, and we'd keep going. If we were walking down the street and I saw a woman pushing a baby, I'd take us down another street. Now, my wife was not an idiot. She wasn't an idiot. She wasn't oblivious. She began to rely on me to distract her so that she didn't have to break down. Now, it started in reaction to this movie, but then I started to recall more and more the things that I used to do to protect my wife from, you know, having to be reintroduced to that pain. And I was listening to these discussions about emotional labor, and I realized that's a form of emotional labor, but it's a form of emotional labor that men are not generally credited for. And as I thought about it, I was like, men do a lot of these kind of things, but we're not credited for doing any of the emotional labor. And really in the 80s, when this concept of emotional labor was becoming popular, the idea behind it was a feminist one. It was that only women provide emotional labor in relationships. Men just go to work, come home, and they benefit from women's emotional work, and they're not appreciative of it. They don't reciprocate it. It was this real misandrist kind of take on men's emotional roles and relationships. But what I began to discover was that not only have I been doing this, but a lot of men have been doing it. We were just never told it was emotional labor. You know, when we were listening to all those R&B songs and learning how to treat women and learning to anticipate their moods and learning how to talk to them and get the right kind of emotional response. And then when you're in a relationship and you're reading her moods and how her day went, and you're learning to get around her moods and help get her in a better mood when she's had a bad day. We never were told that was emotional labor. Emotional labor was just something women did. It's kind of like abuse. Abuse is only something men did. Even though women hit men, we weren't classifying that as abuse. Well, in similar fashion, when men did things to provide an emotionally safe environment for women, it wasn't credited as emotional labor. It was just stuff men did. But when we start to reflect on it and realize, wait a minute, these are services that I have learned how to do again, I grew up in a family full of women. I grew up listening to R&B. So whether it was the women in my family, the women I was trying to date and or marry, and later on in life, even daughters, we learn how to serve women emotionally, but we're not taught that this is emotional labor. So I'm giving you the example about the things I did to protect my wife from her own emotions. But every man on here can tell you a story about one type of service that they provided that hasn't even entered the discussion yet. And all of them are various forms of emotional labor. So that's why it's termed the way it is: male relationship emotional labor. I did it that way on purpose so you could not cut men out of it. I'm talking specifically about the kinds of sacrifices and roles that men play to provide service, particularly emotional service, to women that they're not credited for. But here's the interesting thing. If you don't do it or you're not skilled at it, you'll find yourself quickly exited from more than one relationship. So it becomes something that men are graded by, but we're never formally taught to do it. It's an expectation, but if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to stay in a relationship. So it becomes something, it's almost like a form of currency. It's required of you, but nobody's ever formally taught you how to do it. Nobody even told you they value it. But a woman will leave you quick if you don't do it. So you have to come up with addressing these unspoken issues that you're punished for if you don't do them right. But if you do them right, you're kind of rewarded with her presence, but you're never going to be credited for it, and she's not going to formally acknowledge it. And then she'll turn around and tell the world she's the only one providing emotional labor, and you're just a spoiled brat that receives it and doesn't reciprocate it. But the whole time, most men are providing emotional labor for women that goes unregarded. So whenever you have to anticipate her feelings and strategize how to, respond to them, you more than likely you're performing a sort of emotional labor that's unspoken. Even amongst men. Men don't even really talk about it. It's just something we do.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is timely because we're in an age now where a lot of ladies are holding out a clipboard and saying, well, if I do this for the family, this is unpaid labor.
Yes.
I'm doing unpaid labor
Yes.
and I'm not being compensated for it.
Yes.
Or, if you're not paying all the bills, then, then you're not going to get this and this and this from me.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah.
I'll give you another brief example. When I accepted, I got 3 offers from 3 different universities when I finished grad school. I interviewed at several spots. Fresno and 2 other universities gave me an offer. I negotiated my wife her master's degree so that when we got here, she could just jump into classes. Right now, the reason that I'm calling this emotional labor is that once my wife finished her bachelor's degree, she was afraid to apply for a master's. She wanted to do a master's in social work, but she was afraid of getting rejected. So year after year would go by, and she would say she was going to apply. She would conveniently forget about it. And then we get in an argument over it later when she would complain that her career wasn't advancing and mine was, because I was in grad school working on my doctorate. We were living together. We were married. And she's saying, well, your career is advancing and mine isn't. And I'm saying, well, you refuse to apply for the master's that you say you need in order to move forward. And so we would have these arguments. So when I got offered Fresno State, I said, well, look, I'll accept it if you pay me this much and then you offer my wife an opportunity to do her master's for free. And they were like, okay. So she, neither one of us were really interested in moving to Fresno, but she changed her mind about moving when now she could get this master's degree done. Now, on one level, there's an educational component to that. There's a material component because it meant that she'd be able to get paid more. She'd be able to secure better jobs. But I mostly did it as an emotional service to her because I knew if I didn't, we would keep going through this cycle of her not being able to move forward to do the things she wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And as a husband that loved her, arguing with her wasn't going to help. I couldn't apply for it for her without her participation, and she refused to kind of help. So this was my way of handling something that was difficult for her so she didn't have to. It was a form, you could say it was a variety of different types of services, but one of them was at least a form of emotional service. Nobody talks about the kinds of things men do as emotional service or labor. Nobody would tell that story and call it emotional labor. They just say, oh, so your wife did her master's degree. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, it's more than that. The reason I did it is I knew this is something she needed help with, and I wanted her to feel better. And this was clearly an area where this was going to, continue to, be an issue for her. Now, if men start qualifying their behavior in relationships and taking in account of the types of emotional labor they provide, I wonder how the discussion would change around that whole issue. And I wonder if men would start to really pay attention to how much they've already been doing, as opposed to just being pressured to do more. Let's take stock. How much are you already doing that you haven't been credited for? Because if you're not credited for what you're already doing, you're not going to be credited for anything you do more of simply because she shamed you into doing it. So let's first take stock. How much have you done that's been, for the most part, disregarded and ignored? What sacrifices have you made that get swept under the rug and ignored? Just curious.
Mm. Okay. Thank you, Dr. T. I'm going to read some of these super chats and then we will wind it down because I've held you for 2.5 hours. Mr. Z, thank you for stopping through. Mr. Z says it's one doc talking to the other doc. Great interview. And Mr. Z on his show lists plenty of examples of the not going 50-50 thing and a lot of other. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say shout out to Mr. Z, but go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And examples of a lot of other things too. Jailblock 302 says KS became Satan when he bought the barbershop convo to the mainstream. Yeah. Someone, she'd said one time that those are things that men were already talking about. It was just being talked about quietly.
Mm-hmm. But now you couldn't dismiss them and act like men didn't have anything to say. No, men had plenty to say, and we always have. We just never were allowed to.
Yeah.
Kevin kind of kicked the front door down in terms of the mainstream, and people were
had to listen to something. They didn't really have to, but they were compelled. But the thing I find interesting is how many feminists hated his guts. And I always found it interesting because I'm like, y'all are upset about a guy on Facebook that you have to volunteer to listen to. But many of us had to read feminist doctrine in classes that had nothing to do with gender, and we were forced to read it. My son is like I said, he's in marine biology, but he's forced to talk about and study feminism. Make that make sense.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with his field, but he's forced to read it and study it. But y'all are upset about a guy on YouTube that you don't have to listen to. Never made sense to me.
Yeah. It's one of those quagmires of YouTube. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. But Mike of Malice Leon 008 says Scott Galloway with Oprah Winfrey slightly offended the women by telling them basically to be community eunuchs. Invest your time with your community. Okay. I'm not sure if he meant men or women, because usually community eunuchs is associated with men.
Right.
Andre says, thank you, Dr. Dunbar and Dr. T, for doing this stream together. Thank you, Andre, for the $5 super chat. And Inspirational Truth says, modern feminist framing equals institutionalized solipsism, unfortunately. I think that was the last one. I appreciate everybody for donating to this stream. Dr. T, you've lent 2.5 hours of your valuable time. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Well, I want to thank you, man, for being patient, sitting through this with me, and inviting me back multiple times to your platform, man. I appreciate it. So thank you, and I will let the public know that I continue to be jealous of his damn beard, because he's got that smooth white thing on, and some of us can't get that yet. So damn it, I'm gonna get that one day.
Okay. Well, you know, like I said, you've done hard work advocating for us and dispelling myths, highlighting data, disaggregating data, telling our story. This is, Black History Month is coming up in two months. This is the stuff you're uncovering. This is part of our history that's not talked about or highlighted or given a magnifying glass. So you do a lot of hard work uncovering these things and freeing a lot of us. So for that, I'm going to give you an applause here. All right, we have one more super chat here. This super sticker is from Minister Misty. Thank you for the $5 super sticker. Dr. T, do you have anything else?
Nah, man, I just appreciate you bringing me up, man. I hope everything goes well for all of you out there. Shout out to the brothers that have participated in the conversation. It's much appreciated. Yeah, man, that's about it.
Okay, I'm going to do just a quick advertisement before I go. Dr. T, I did note you in the prologue of my book. I didn't note you, and I did cite your book in my bibliography.
Oh wow, man.
Because this is a Black boy's story, and this is about what happens when your dad is in a different city, and your uncles. You don't have a lot of male supervision, and that's something me and my mom went around in circles about when I was writing this, because she did. My mom was an exceptional mom, and she did the best she could, but there were still things that were needed from others, and that's a hard thing to, when you look back at, reconcile, and it's a hard thing for your mom to reconcile as well, and it's a hard thing to talk about in terms of your family and who was there and who wasn't, and why they were there and why they weren't. And those are all things I talk about in here. But I do note Dr. T and his work in here as well.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Yeah.
So for my YouTube subs, for those of you watching, if you want the hardcover, I'm selling those signed copies for $27 and the paperback for $22. You just use one of those methods there in the ticker. On Amazon, the hardcover is $35. The paperback is $27. So I'm giving you guys a sale price. And if you want to go to my online store, I'm going to be very, very brief here. You could pay with one of those methods or use a credit card or a debit card there. And I do have a coupon code, which I'll leave in the chat. That'll take some money off that price if you want one. So with that,
well, let me also just say, not only shout out to the chat here on your channel. These brothers are definitely putting in work on multiple channels, but shout out to the chat on BGS's mirroring of it on his channel. He's playing it over there, and I'm seeing the chat there. So shout out to those brothers over there as well. Appreciate the support all around from all of y'all. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate BGS's support. That he shares it with his network.
Yep.
And that always helps out. And he also helped bring you. He encouraged you to come. Because that, you know what, Dr. T, when I read Dr. Neal's book, I read your book about maybe 2 years earlier. When I read Dr. Neal's book, I started to put it all together about how significant the scholarship from the academy is in terms of shaping policy. BGS talks about policy, but also just shaping the minds of the students who are in your classes. Yeah. And we're seeing that now with these institutions of higher learning and how the kids go in there, and depending upon the programming they get, they come back out, and sometimes their parents don't even recognize them. So you guys play a huge role.
Well, and I appreciate that, but I also have to shout BGS out, because most of the brothers with doctorates that are in the space, if they weren't brought in by BGS, they were greatly supported. Dr. Neal, Green Gorilla, I've seen Dr. L be extremely well supported over there. Yourself, BGS has been, kind of, consistent about that, and he's actually responsible for bringing me in. So I always tell people, Obsidian introduced me to the Black Manosphere. BGS, kind of pulled me online, because I never was planning to do a show. I would just show up in different comment sections, and he was trying to tell me you do better to come up and do a show, and I just kind of wouldn't listen. So I wrote, I was just writing blogs, and I would be lucky if I got 350, 400 people to read a short blog that I wrote. So he took one of my blogs that had 350, views on, and he read it on his channel, and it had 5,000. And he just kind of, in his own way, he just kind of looked at me like, "You getting this message yet? Are you figuring this out?" So he kind of, and then from there, he gave me a lot of tips on how to set up my channel and stuff. So I got to shout out to brother. I appreciate that. Because a lot of us weren't necessarily planning to come into the space. And I know firsthand, he was instrumental in helping with Green Gorilla. And I know Dr. Neal was in his comment sections, before he started his channel. So, all of us have been, supported by BGS in that regard. So shout out to the brother. Okay.
All right. Well, everyone, I probably have 2 more in me before the end of the year. I need to take a break. But I'm happy to have had Dr. Johnson come back. So he covers these topics on his channel all the time. So if you're not subbed, go sub over there. Everybody, so I'm going to wrap this up. Everybody, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. As always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Always try to do your best. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.